And if I can, I'm gonna, if I can, I'd like to have the chief just do a brief invocation for us, and have the deputy mayor lead us in pledge, and then we'll just go ahead and resume and get moving.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Mayor Williams.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Goins.
Here.
Councilmember Bovair.
Here.
Councilmember Koss.
Here.
Councilmember Warner.
Here.
City Attorney Garganese.
Here, telephonically.
Interim City Manager Fuhrer.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. City Manager.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. You may recall this workshop was originally scheduled for March 17th. Was delayed until May 6th. We're in a little bit different situation now with running this meeting electronically, and so we do have it available for comments online as well if we have citizens that want to engage us. So with that, I would like to cover the agenda for this meeting. First, we're going to start with the background, the general fund sustainability model as it relates to last year's Stantec projection. We're going to review the fiscal year 2020 budget to date, prior budget year philosophies, fund balance, reserves and policy, revenue challenges due to external factors specifically related to COVID-19, those revenue projections. Then based off of that, we will cover, do some comments from City Council last year as far as the initial CIP requests of what came in. We'll review those and then where we're headed with those so you can see the changes and the recommendations. We also did some additional analysis on grant availability for those capital improvement plans and master plans, and then we will solicit budget priorities and engage in that discussion with members of council, and then the gain a preliminary consensus on the millage rate, fire assessment, stormwater assessment, utility rates as we move into the development of this fiscal year 2021 budget. And then finally review the budget calendar, of which the dates are set currently, but what we're finding in most jurisdictions as well as ourselves, due to the revenue trends and accounting for up-to-date revenues, we're going to constantly be monitoring those as we move through this process and making adjustments as necessary. So to start with, the city continues to maintain responsible fiscal management through the CAFR Award. You can see that there in the Distinguished Budget Award. Reviewing the city's credit ratings, the city's general fund still maintains a AA2 rating. What we did receive in an update there March 23rd was that Standard & Poor's reassessed our utility fund, and they did downgrade it from a AA positive to a AA stable. And the reason for that was they were looking at the potential impacts of COVID-19 related to our utilities' ability to recover that revenue. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the presentation about what we're seeing as far as actuals. So it may not, their assessment may not be true at this point. As we are in the current fiscal year 2020, we did contract with Stantec last year to project for this current fiscal year that we're in, to make a determination on projecting costs and ensuring that our expenditures are in line with what their projections were. and we've validated and updated the assumptions that they have within their model. We updated the cost allocation, and that being those costs for services from our various utility funds, water, sewer, stormwater, for the services that are provided through the general fund for finance, HR, IT, fleet, all those support services. We also evaluated the utility rates annually, as we do. There is a full rate study underway this year. Also evaluated the millage and fire assessment rates annually. That will continue. And then in addition to that, the stormwater rate. We modified the methodology of collection and then updated those projections based on that. And we have reviewed the capital funding through general fund balance reserves. There's a few projects listed on there that are currently underway, to include the Dr. Jolie Smith Center to be completed in June 2020, the Lee Winter Park and Riverfront Park restoration due to Hurricane Irma, that's projected for July 2020, and then the Fisk Boulevard streetscape with an estimated completion of 2021. And that project has been delayed due to our submission to the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program through the state, and they've continued to ask for supplemental information. We've provided it, and we do anticipate a final resolution or award on that project here in the near future. Yes, sir.
I noticed that you didn't, and I know you got some of them out here, you didn't have, I noticed Pineda with
Yes, Pineda is later in the slides. We've got that on there. But yes, there's $500,000 included in this year's budget for Pineda, of which that work should be underway here shortly. The general fund fiscal sustainability analysis by Stantec. You can see this was the model that we used when we were building last year's budget. It projects a fairly significant amount of CIP spending in 18, 19, and then it drastically drops off there in 20 as those projects that I mentioned drop off of the list. And so what you can see as importance on this slide is really the cash in and the cash out. And what we saw as a projection is a very close variance in the early years, and then in the out years there starts to be some separation. And so that was viewed as being within our control in those out years 9 and 10, to where we have plenty of time to make adjustments as well as evaluate economic factors that would influence that. This is our current year snapshot, mid-year snapshot as of March 31st. You can view the accounts there. You receive this monthly through your council agendas as an informational. Important to note is that this is through March 31st, and COVID, the Safer at Home order, went into effect March 23rd. So everything as it appears on this trends as we would normally see it as far as revenues and expenditures. What we're going to find, though, is that, and we're going to talk about it more in depth, is that some of the revenues that we receive specifically from the state tend to trend about 2 months behind when they actually occur. And so we won't expect to see any of those actuals until potentially June. But for these purposes at mid-year, everything seems to be as normal, but we know that will not be the case. Just a brief overview of the general fund balance reserves. We have a policy within our financial operations manual that's adopted by City Council that establishes that restricted general fund balance, and that minimum reserve requirement of 33% of total operating expenditures and $500,000 of capital replacement. Those numbers are calculated every year with the city's CAFR when the audited numbers come in, and then those percentages are taken from the operating and then determined what the city needs to put into that account to ensure that we are meeting that policy. And at the last city council meeting, we did just that. We brought the number forward. It added an additional $1.7 million into that fund, which is really good policy, especially considering the situation that we may find ourselves in. Those reserves that are not restricted are to be used for capital or one-time expenses only, and should you choose to fund reoccurring expenses out of them, it would lead to a long-term financial position that may cause you to seek that stabilization fund. If you were to access that stabilization fund, as we look at uncertain economic times, there may be some questions as to, if we were to tap into that, what are the impacts? Well, what you would have to consider is that at such time that you draw funds from that reserve, that you need to establish how you're going to replenish those funds. And as we're looking at times when folks are having a hard time meeting their utility bills, paying for food, we could be in a position where we would have to raise revenues through the millage rate, fire assessment, or some other means that could add additional financial hardship. And so it's really important when we look at this to utilize those fund balances as most judiciously as possible, especially when considering the emergency response that may be pending yet this year. As we enter hurricane season, we're still dealing with the pandemic, and so there is an amount in that unrestricted category that's available to spend, and it's really at that point, facing what we're facing, that should remain intact, get through the hurricane season, see if we get the reimbursements from FEMA related to Hurricane Irma, and then evaluate it at that time if there are catalytic projects that we would choose to invest in. Okay, and then just the results of the CAFR, which will be, I believe, this Friday. You each have individual meetings with our contracted auditor, where they will cover this in more detail with you. But based on that, the stabilization fund that was just increased at the last city council meeting now sits at $12,288,375. We have 6.2 roughly assigned within that fund balance, and then there's unassigned of 5.2 million. Now that's as of the CAFR. That doesn't include expenses that are in this current year's budget. Down below you see in the fiscal year budget, the current budget, there's a projected use of fund balance of 2.4 million, leaving a total of 2.7 million in that unrestricted, and that's what I just mentioned as far as really cautiously approaching that delta of where you'd be tapping into potentially that stabilization fund. So we really want to carefully observe that. Within that dollar amount, that 2.4, there's Pineda Street, 500,000. The annual street paving and sidewalks, 330,000. There was the full electric vehicle purchase, which was the Chevy Bolt for the Code Enforcement Division. You had the separation agreement with the city manager. You had the budget rollover from fiscal year 2019. That encompasses a number of projects, whether capital projects or planning projects that carried over the fiscal year, that those dollars were rolled over into fiscal year 2020. There's 2 railroad crossings. That's from Florida East Coast Railway. They evaluate those crossings about every 5 years. They look for replacement. Since their tracks were present before our roads, we're responsible for that maintenance. And that maintenance cost varies depending on each crossing, as lanes are wider and there's certain configurations and design standards that they have to meet. And so what they had projected for us was $209,000. We did work with them, and they came back and said, due to the timing of the Virgin Trains rail line construction, that they would be able to defer those costs and incorporate it when they redesign and lay the second set of tracks and modify them. You can see the work cart for $15,000. That was for the downtown crew. That was the electric four-wheeler, and then also the police fire system for IT and the training room, and that was a fire inspection, the result of a fire inspection to provide adequate suppression in the IT room. As we talk about the potential impacts of COVID-19, the governor issued that Safer at Home order March 23rd, and that extended till this Monday, or May 4th. And so that had a significant impact on several revenue sources that the city receives, to include the state shared revenues. As we all know, a majority of the revenue that the state of Florida receives, without that personal income tax, they heavily rely on state sales tax. And so with that Safer at Home order, commerce almost came to a halt. And so those revenues that the state typically receives dried up rather quickly. And those revenues are shared with local governments through various formulas based on population and other items. And what we did receive on Monday was the state released the numbers in March for their sales tax revenue, and they while they receive the top 100. They could verify that. Some are still received, within the next month, so they don't have all the final numbers, but their estimate currently is a loss of 25% in March alone. And that, of course, the Safer at Home order going into effect that final week of March. So we have a pretty good idea of that impact. And what that means in dollar terms is approximately $750 million to the state. So it is pretty significant. You have also the local sales tax, local gas tax, local business tax, and we will touch on the budgeted as well as actual numbers on each of these accounts so you can get an idea of what we have currently, and then we will continue to track these accounts and submit them to you in a report monthly so you can see them as they come in real time to really understand the city's financial picture. Building permits, of course, with the Safer at Home order, there may be some reductions in building permit submittals. We haven't found that to be the case. I can tell you that right now. In fact, we're almost meeting our projected budget at this point in time, so that's a good thing. The future is what the concern would be on that one. And then penalties. What that is, those are the late fees for those for the water accounts. The billing is currently out of the city's general fund, and so any waiver of those fees comes back and impacts the general fund to the tune of about $60,000 a month, and so that is an additional impact. So what we currently know about COVID-19 is that the economic impact of this is really unprecedented, and there's very little data to suggest what may occur from this. It's been referred to as sort of like a hibernation of the economy and then a wake up. And the question would be, how are we going to wake up? Are we coming right back to where we were? Are we slowly waking up? And so there's a lot of work being done on that currently, and we have a presentation from Public Trust Advisors, John Grady, who's also on the line, and I want to cut over, he's got a brief presentation to give you an up-to-date analysis on what we're looking at more of a macro level for the potential impacts of COVID-19. John, are you on the line?
John, are you there? Did he use his phone? John? Well, he doesn't there when we started.
So what we can do, we'll work to get him on the line, but we'll continue with the presentation, then we'll come back. So he's gonna provide an overall high level view of what we're looking at from an economic impact, and then what we need to consider here locally, in addition to those sales tax revenues, building permits, and fees that we're losing currently, is also what is the long-term impact of property values. There's a lot of information out there right now suggesting that it wouldn't be as significant as the '08 recession, but they really don't know, because there's a lot of fallout coming from the unemployment side of things, and depending on how quickly those businesses reopen and how many they employ are really going to signal where we're going in the future. For instance, as you consider Disney in Central Florida, while they're more in the Orlando market, they have an impact on Cocoa in the Central Florida region. They employ close to 70,000 employees. That the majority of them have been furloughed or laid off. But what's really missing from that segment is not only are those employees unemployed, but they have many contracts with professional services that aren't being performed right now. And so that economic impact is even wider than what you may think of in terms of just employees laid off. And so that's something that we need to continue to watch. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so the port, they also have Disney Cruise Lines that move out of the port. We have a number of businesses in the city that offer parking for the port that at this point in time are vacant because they're not actually sending out cruise ships per CDC guidelines. And I did see some information that I believe in August, Carnival Cruise Lines is working to run a cruise out of Port Canaveral. So depending on the timing of that.
So their overall impact is a big impact.
Certainly. Yeah, I mean, they certainly provide a regional impact, even beyond just the cove and what's located, in close proximity to them. It's a huge economic engine for not only the county, but the state. And so, it's my understanding the majority of their revenue is based off of the cruise passenger industry. And so they're certainly looking at some
Can you hear me?
pretty dire economic times, I would imagine.
Yes, John?
And Matt, I'm sorry.
John? Yeah, we can hear you now. Can you just hold it?
Go ahead, sir.
And I can add that something that really concerned me was the timing of the stimulus checks and when they distribute those checks, because those checks, a lot of those checks came out at a time where, people weren't shutting off your electric, they weren't shutting off your water. They still aren't doing it at this present time. And that if you really wanted to boost your economy, those checks probably should have come out, once you start to reopen your cities and so forth and so on. And that would have been a driving force to get people out. And, but anyway, quite a few. Yeah.
It wasn't vital to the like a lot of people just kind of what diversity or not, but we probably should look at what some other countries did instead of shoving money into some of the things that are trying to shove money into. There are a couple of countries that just continue to provide salaries for people that are working, or those businesses that people are working and pay for the salary, so that money stays neutral, because a one-time check of $1,200 doesn't really do a lot.
Yeah.
40 times.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and a program like the Payment Protection Program, those funds were gone almost immediately. That covered 8 weeks of potential payroll, and we're to that point, I think 6 weeks in here in Florida. So,
And some of those dollars didn't get to where it was intended to go. It stopped.
Yes,
We would definitely have to work with the economic impact.
that's right. And it's my understanding we have John Grady, Public Trust Advisors, on the line. John, are you there?
Good morning. This is John Grady. Can you all hear me okay now?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I have your slide show up, and I can scroll through it as you talk if you just let me know when you want me to transition.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for the time this morning to provide an update. Before we start, Mayor, members of the council, want to thank you for the opportunity. And also, I hope everyone, the city and your families are staying safe and healthy in these unprecedented times. And I believe I was there in January, so not too long ago. And as we all know, the world has changed quite a bit since then. And so I spoke with Ms. Bowman, and she asked me to put together a few slides to give a high-level update on the economy and what's going on out there. And so with that, I will jump into this presentation. I will try to pause periodically if you have questions for me, or certainly be available at the end. I know with the availability of news, many of you have seen of the information that's coming that I'm going to present today, but hopefully we'll give you a little perspective and our thoughts on that. So thank you for forwarding the slides. If we could jump over to slide 3, please.
Yep.
And this slide, the heading is The Great Lockdown. What this is showing is the growth projections for the global economy, as you can see on the left, and then it breaks it out by advanced and emerging markets. But really the focus here, these are projections from the International Monetary Fund. These were as of April. You can see there from 2019 at 2.9% global growth. This year, that's projected negative 3% growth. So obviously not great news as a result of the shutdown here in the United States as well as globally. If there is a silver lining, and I think this comment was made a little earlier regarding the level and speed and timing of the recovery, the IMF is currently projecting the potential growth of 5.8% in 2021. Of course, there is so much uncertainty right now with the depth and the length of this current recession that we're in, likely to be in, as to what that growth will be. Of course, we do know that it's going to have significant impacts here in the near term. But the thought is that once these economies reemerge, that there would be a potentially faster recovery with this type of a recession as opposed to a purely economic recession. And so looking at the next slide on 4, comparing the projected decline in global growth of negative 3%, slide 4 shows us the comparison of the Great Lockdown of 2020 as being called, among other things, and comparing that to the global contraction from the crisis that happened in 2008 and 2009. So you can see there a significant larger decrease in global growth as a result of this pandemic versus what we saw from the crisis in 2008, 2009. Again, I think the hope is really across the board that while this could potentially be much deeper in the near term, that the recovery could potentially be much faster than what we saw after the crisis. And I think we've got a couple of charts here to really show the time frame of how quickly things have changed. And so looking at slide 5, the first reading of U.S. GDP was just released here in the last few days. And what this is showing us is really quarterly GDP or economic growth here in the U.S. over the last few years. And not unexpectedly, we saw a contraction in the U.S. economy in the first quarter, according to the first reading of minus 4.8%. And of course, that would be led by the consumer. And so if we look at this chart and look at the far right-hand side, we can see the dark blue bar, and I highlighted the consumer spending contraction of minus 5.26%. And that was, of course, a majority. But we also had negative or contraction a negative growth in the investment in inventories. And one key takeaway from that is even going into the first quarter of 2020, if we look back over the prior 3 quarters, you see those gray bars that are actual contractions. So businesses had actually started to slow their spending in building new plants and spending money to get products to the shelves in anticipation of some slowdown, given the fact that we were in the longest expansion in U.S. history, spanning 10 years plus. So there was already a contraction in investment in inventories, and then of course, as we, the consumer, here starting in March and particularly stopped spending, we can see that dramatic impact here in the first quarter. And given that this was really just a full month of the consumer spending, in January and February were likely very positive consumer spending, that number will likely get dramatically worse here in the second quarter, in hopes that in the second half of 2020, again, we would hope to start entering into a recovery phase, but it really remains to be seen. There's so much uncertainty out there. And so as we got into the pandemic, and we can see here on slide 6, as many of you, I'm sure, know very well, we saw the market go into a tailspin in mid to late March, with the S&P and Dow hitting lows actually on March 23rd. And if we look at the peak in February of those two indices to the bottom in March 23rd, those indices have dropped by 33 and 37%. Significant drop. And during that time, interest rates also plummeted, starting with the Fed cutting the overnight rate from 1.5 to 0 through two meetings of emergency rate cuts. I think that was mentioned a little earlier today as well. But on March 3rd, the Fed cut 50 basis points, and then as things got progressively worse through March, on March 15th, the Fed went ahead on another emergency meeting and cut that rate all the way to that 0 to 25 basis point range, effectively bringing us back to what's called that zero interest rate policy. And that, if you'll remember, is what happened during the Great Financial Crisis, Great Recession, and that rate was kept at that 0 to 25 basis point range for about 7 years. So if anyone's guessed at this point how long the Fed would keep that rate close to 0, you may have even heard conversations of whether or not they would consider pushing the rate negative. There's a lot of debate on that. Doesn't seem to be on the table at the moment. But given everything else the Fed has done, really all bets are off. And on slide 6, just looking at what took place and what will continue to likely take place here in 2020 from the Fed balance sheet perspective, that blue line shows us the balance sheet going back to just before the crisis on the far left, where they've maintained approximately $800 billion in assets on their balance sheet. And then, as we all remember, through the crisis and really through the early recovery phase that started in 2010, that the Fed continued to increase their balance sheet through those quantitative easing programs. And as you can see, as we move across from left to right, building that balance sheet up to close to $4.5 trillion and keeping it there for a few years. And then in 2018, making the decision to actually start to wind down the balance sheet as the economy was continuing to move along. And then, as you all know, most recently with the implementation of multiple buying programs from the Fed, moving that rate up, moving the balance sheet up to what is projected to be $9 trillion, potentially $10 trillion, really just by the end of 2020. I don't want to be too long-winded here, so I'll move along, but please let me know if you have questions as we go through. How is that impacted? Of course, we all know the big story, and this is shown on slide 7, is the labor market. The labor markets have been doing very well, and actually hit 60-year lows just prior to the pandemic, and that reversed very dramatically. As you can see here in March, payrolls declined by 701,000. That's likely a very favorable number compared to what we'll see in coming months. As you look down on slide 7 to the bottom chart, you can see those yellow dots really just, those illustrate the weekly initial claims, and they peaked on March 20th at close to 6.9 million of new claims, but continue to see very dramatic amounts of initial unemployment. And those blue bars show what the total was just really from February through April 20th. And as you can see, 31.6 million jobs lost just in a matter of, call it 8 weeks. And most of those lost in a matter of just a few weeks in March. And to put that in perspective, the economy picked up around 22 million jobs in 10 years following the Great Recession. So between, call it January of 2020 through the end of 2019, picked up 22 million jobs, and we lost all of that plus an additional 9 million jobs in just a matter of weeks. So very, very dramatic. And I think a comment was made earlier as well by one of the council members that this unemployment is going to be arguably the biggest issue on how fast folks can get back to work, because as we know, we as consumers make up a good 2/3, 3/4 of the economy, and if we're not working, the economy is not going to grow. So turning to just a couple of highlights as this economic information starts to come out, and just as a point of reference, it really wasn't until late April and now into May that we're going to start to see these numbers start to really start to show their impact. Retail sales, just to show you the decline from February to March, negative 5.8%. Again, that is likely to drop dramatically. And I see this chart in particular back to compare to the Great Recession, and just to show us in that Great Recessionary time frame, we had a significant amount of time in negative retail sales, and that was really what hindered sort of stronger growth during that period. So this is one of those charts that we can reference, and we'll see as time goes on, how long will we have negative retail sales and other negative consumer spending indications. If it's longer, then obviously that would result in a longer time frame for a recovery. If we get folks back to work or through stimulus, putting these funds into people's bank accounts and they can spend that, then that may provide the ability to recover faster than if those stimulus funds were not there. And then just looking at the bottom, is no surprise, consumer confidence is plummeting as well, as we can see in February, just over 100 and falling to 71 in April, and again likely to see that number drop again. So consumer confidence, the lowest it's been in 7 years. And then just a couple of slides to wrap up my comments, and of course be available for questions or discussion. As we look over to slide 9, this just shows us through this quarter. Remember last time we saw interest rates were around 1.5%. They had fallen by half. If we go back to November of 18, rates in the 2-year area were closer to 3%. Overnight rates were 2.5%, and we're now very close to zero. In fact, the 2-year is trading where we see this chart today. The 2 years actually right around that same rate at 18 basis points. And we also saw, as you might all recall, in late March, the 3-month T-bill actually traded at negative yields for about 8 trading sessions. So really unprecedented. And that was, again, just a result of both the U.S. and global market participants really making a rush to liquidity and safe haven. And that's why you saw those rates plummet as the price of those treasury bonds went up. They have recovered somewhat. 3-month T-bill today is trading around 7 basis points. So again, rates across the board extremely low and likely to be there for some time. And then on slide 10, just quickly, this just shows, focusing on the blue line, the implied rate for the overnight rate at 0.072. So really what this is just showing is that the thought is that overnight rate will likely be at 0 into early 2021, and likely much longer than that. So we'll have to see how the recovery, when that does take place, how fast and again how strong that might be. And then last couple slides, just quickly, just showing us again the dramatic decline in rates over the quarter, and then just on 12, what 12 is showing us is where the blue line is showing us where rates are today, approximately, and then showing you that orange line just slightly higher at 22 basis points, but then you can see out to the 5-year rate of 48 basis points. So if there is, again, any positive news to this, even though rates are projected to be lower, if we start to see a positive slope or higher yields as we move out along the yield curve, that is a signal that the market is anticipating economic growth, and that would be a positive sign to see steepness to the yield curve. Although this is just show you what markets are thinking about today, and really it's anyone's guess as we move through the next several weeks with earnings, and again how quickly people are able to get back to work. So that's a bit of an economics. I'll just make one comment and certainly be available to answer any other questions. I think it's important to mention to you, especially since our last presentation, that even with all the volatility in the markets from both the equity markets and the fixed income markets, and this is why public funds are invested in fixed income securities, is that you can hold these securities and not worry about having to sell them necessarily at a loss like you would in equity or other investment types. And even though rates have come to zero, you've got a very liquid portfolio. Your book yield of your overall investment program is about 1.26%. So not the best rate as we've seen historically, but certainly better than the close to zero rates that you would earn today. And that portfolio of securities is very highly rated, again, liquid, and they will provide, at least in the near term, additional net income for you as you look forward. At least in the near term. Now, as we look to reinvest those as they mature, of course, we'll be reinvesting at lower rates. So we'll work with Ms. Bowman and her team and provide indications of projected interest rates as we look forward. I know that was a lot. I hope that was informative, and Ms. Bowman, let me know if there's anything I may have missed that you'd like me to cover, but I'll pause here for any questions or discussion.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, did we also have stock investments, don't we? You have a stock portfolio as well, don't we? No? Oh, so what?
Yes, these are all fixed income securities, as Ms. Bowman mentioned, and all could be held to maturity and hope paying interest income along the way.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
All right, if there are no more questions, thank you, John, for that information.
Thank you very much, Council, Mr. Mayor. And if you'd like me to have any other follow-up conversations with you, please let me know and I'll be available.
Sure will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and then to pick up where we were, related to this pandemic, there's still questions remaining, even though we've entered the phase 1 of the reopening here in Florida, is how long is this going to continue to provide impacts? And then are we going to see isolated number of cases rise quickly and then localized efforts made to contain those? Is there going to be a major second wave in the fall, as some have described? And so there's a lot of unknown. We're not out of the woods related to just the impacts of the pandemic, let alone the economic impacts. And so we're going to continue to monitor that as well. The unemployment rates that we have, it was at 2.8% in February. This is for the state of Florida. And then in March, 4.3%. That doesn't account for what we've seen since then. And so the latest statistics from the Department of Economic Opportunity was that since March, 4.2% of the labor force had entered unemployment. And here locally in Brevard County, 12,000 claims. Now, if you've paid attention to any of the headlines, there are a number of folks that are still having challenges registering for unemployment. So those numbers, are still potentially a shadow of what they may be. We don't really know at this point in time. And then I just wanted to mention as well some information that came out late yesterday. Locally, the Brevard County Commission, some of you are aware that through the CARES Act that was authorized, Brevard County had received approximately $105 million to disperse in accordance with that act within their local jurisdiction. Now, the County Commission considered a number of items at their meeting yesterday as far as what are we going to do with the funding consistent with those guidelines. And they approved use of up to $4.4 million of those funds for housing rental, mortgage assistance, utility and security deposit, food stability for individuals impacted by COVID-19. There's still a lot of discussions occurring related to what are we doing with the rest of the funding. And so we're pretty certain that an amount of that funding will go back towards the personal protection items that not only the county has taken to protect their employees as well as the public, but also ours. And so we are working with them on providing those numbers to them, as well as estimated numbers all the way through December. And so
I can add, which was a little confusing, because if you had seen the meeting, it gives you an impression that they seem to think that this is their money, and that they don't understand this needs to be distributed throughout the cities and towns and villages in Brevard County. And hopefully they're going to get that messages from some of the mayors and city managers if it comes down to it.
Yes, sir. And here in Brevard County, we're actually pretty fortunate related to that, because the top 12 most populous counties in the state received a direct allocation of funding, to include Brevard County. Now, if you're in Indian River County, you didn't receive an allocation. You have to go through the state individually to receive any of that funding. And so whether it's with Brevard County or the state, I do feel that we're a little bit more fortunate in that we have some local control over that. And so we are continuing to work with them to identify areas that would benefit our local economies as we move forward. This sheet right here was some work that Stantec had done for us with the identified revenue accounts that we spoke about earlier that we believe will be impacted based on COVID-19. And within this chart, you can see what we projected for the fiscal year 2020 budget, the 6-month actual. That doesn't necessarily include a lot of the impacts of COVID-19, and then the remaining budgeted revenues to be collected. Now, what you find down below is they actually did some projections for us of a bad, worse, and really bad, if you look at it from that perspective. And so, keeping in mind, this is for fiscal year 2020, the current year we're in. This isn't projecting for 21 yet. This is our current year. They're projecting on the low impact $710,000 loss in revenue approximately, and then the medium impact $860,000 approximately, and then the high impact of $1 million. And so considering that, we won't be able to true up those estimates until we do receive some of those revenues in. As I mentioned, some of them come 2 months behind. So as we start to see June, we'll see those March numbers, and then really telling will be the April. And so we're going to continue to monitor these accounts, and as I mentioned, those will be included monthly for City Council, so you can see the impacts as they occur. So you may be asking, what is the city doing to mitigate those impacts? As we look at this from a longer term perspective, at minimum 18 months look ahead, to put ourselves in the best position we can to ensure that we continue to maintain our existing levels of service, as well as our workforce without furloughing or laying off. And so there's a number of measures that we've already identified and are underway to include looking at those vacant positions that we currently have and freezing those positions, which means that the budget is removed from the fiscal year. The position is still present. There's just no budget for the position. And this is for the remainder of fiscal year 2020. You have the Parks and Right-of-Way coordinator position. That position itself, while it's not going away, those duties are being picked up in-house by a project manager that, as we review those projects that are currently underway, Jolie Smith, the Riverfront, as those conclude, these duties will be transferred to that employee, and so we can still continue to meet those obligations. The Streets and Stormwater Manager position, that position's been vacant all year, and actually was something that there were some changes at the end of last fiscal year structurally within Public Works organization, that position was eliminated and those duties were collapsed into our then stormwater engineer and grounds and facilities manager. So there's some savings there. We had an HR intern that we're freezing. There's also the Summer Youth Internship Program. We spoke about that at a prior council meeting. And while that program, in its traditional sense, will not be possible this year, we are actually working on a contract with CareerSource under a separate program that the city wouldn't have to provide funding, but yet our youth within the community can be put to work not only at the City of Cocoa, but potential private employers. And so we're working with them right now, and they have an identification process as well, means-based, just like our former program was, and we'll be continuing with that this summer. So you will see some high school interns on site as well as within the community. So I'm not sure if that's a program that CareerSource has on a recurring basis, or if it's something that's come out of, trying to reemploy those locally. And so we are looking forward to that. And I know Tammy is, once the contract's finalized, they'll be conducting those interviews and reaching out to the community. There were a number of operating funds that we evaluated to include a city management retreat. There was funding in the budget to conduct leadership training for management level employees and above. That funding's being swept, and those items will come to City Council at the next meeting for approval because we still have to transfer the funds. There was an information technology security study. We were able to work with the Department of Homeland Security to actually run that penetration testing without paying someone. And so they now do that on a regular basis and identify any gaps we have in our network security. And so we actually ended up with a better evaluation than we would have with a third party. And so that funding can be swept. We talked about the railroad crossings earlier. That funding would be available to be swept, as we don't need to make that payment to FEC for those. So with those cost reductions totaled up for this fiscal year, you're looking at $451,000. And as we look at Stantec's estimated worst case for this fiscal year, you're still looking at a gap of about $500,000. And so while we've identified some sources, we've identified some additional, but we don't want to take that step just yet because we want to start receiving some actuals to make factual-based decisions on, where we need to move next. But it's important that we continue to do this, as these impacts or reductions could mean a whole lot, especially as we move into the next year. And so we are continuing to look at that. So as we look forward to the fiscal year 2021 budget planning, we do anticipate $38 million in projected general fund revenue, and that's almost flat compared to what we projected last year. Of course, that doesn't include any sort of evaluation of what we're going to see for actuals, and so as we continue to monitor that, we may need to adjust that number, and certainly at the June workshop, we will have more information for you. March 16th, the departments began the entry of their budgets into our software system, and early June is when I receive those reports and we begin our meetings with the departments. The capital spending, we're going to continue to evaluate those capital costs, and you'll see them on the upcoming slides, but so that we can meet those obligations out of reoccurring revenues, because a lot of these capital costs are reoccurring in nature, whether it's vehicles, roadway maintenance. There's a number of items, and so we want to make sure that the city is in the best position financially, and not only financially, but also that we're taking care of our assets, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. We are continuously identifying grant opportunities that align with those capital plans, so we can minimize that impact on the general fund, as well as stormwater and utilities. That's ongoing as we continue to see these federal programs and state programs roll out. We want to make sure we're in the best position to receive those funds. And the departments currently are working off of a 0% increase in operating and no new positions. Now, while they have submitted some positions that they would like to have and believe are necessary, those positions at this point in time would be held from the budget, even though we're still tracking the costs and the needs for evaluation at mid-year. So if the economic conditions are favorable, we may be in a position that we can come back at mid-year, evaluate those positions as well as some of the operating expenditures, bring that into the budget and execute it. So it's a consistent monitoring and stepped approach so that we don't overextend ourselves in an unknowing economic times. As far as revenue, we did talk about the impacts of COVID-19. We're also anticipating about $2.8 million as related to Hurricane Irma from FEMA, and that's still outstanding. With the completion of those projects down by the waterfront, we can submit the final paperwork to FEMA, and then it's in their hands to provide us with the reimbursements. We've been working with them since 2017, so they have all the documentation that they could possibly have up to this point. They just need the actual numbers.
You can submit that within 2 months time of this.
Yeah, if those projects are complete in July, when we receive that final invoice, you can believe we're going to be sending them the final costs. That's our hope. That's our hope. I would hope so, but I mean, I think that's maybe wishful thinking, because I just look at it as you don't have anything till it's in the account.
But I mean, considering what we're going through now and whatever we're going through now, I don't see that happening. That
From what I've heard, they're looking at it as a potential stimulus to get those funds out as quick as possible. So that remains to be seen. And then we also have the impacts for our preparation that we did for Hurricane Dorian of about $130,000. Of course, the Walmart distribution center is on the tax roll, and that as part of the agreement to induce that development, there was a 40% tax abatement on their ad valorem, and that actually expires in fiscal year 2023. That was a 5-year commitment. It's also important to note that they also have 140 acres just adjacent to their site that's available for development yet. So we would hope, depending on the economic conditions, that there would be future development along that as well that could lead to additional tax revenue. And then, of course, Stantec at this point in time projecting 3 to 4% growth in property values. That's really a projection at this point. We do anticipate receiving some preliminary valuations mid-May from the Brevard County property appraiser, and so at that June meeting we should have some better numbers for you. As related to expenses, all of our union contracts are in play, and as of fiscal year 2018, with the exception of 2 the police lieutenants and then the fire district chiefs currently outstanding for this fiscal year. But as it relates to the rank and file for police, fire, and then our LIUNA union, there are annual salary increases of 3% in those contracts. And so for fiscal year 21, if we just take our existing employment base, you're looking at an estimated impact of about $187,000. We did meet with our health insurance benefit broker to evaluate our self-insurance fund just this last week, and based on the claims and industry costs, they're currently estimating for the city a 14% increase, which equates to $800,000. Now, the good news in this is that claims for March and leading here into April are trending down. And a lot of that due to elective surgeries not being able to be done, as well as folks just avoiding emergency rooms and healthcare providers due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So is it a realistic expectation that we're going to see that continue? Maybe not, but it does provide some temporary relief, and we may see some movement in this as we continue to move through the year. It is important to note that the Employee Health Center, that utilization for that clinic, since we have a partnership with Cocoa Beach, Rockledge, and Satellite Beach, they consistently monitor the usage by the employee bases, and depending on the usage, your cost share goes up. And so I know our employees, as we started the program, they've continued to use it. And so we anticipate that staying level, and depending on what the other cities' usage is, depends on our share. That, of course, is not near as significant an amount as the others.
Any idea if they are incorporating into technologies to do more remote type, which brings down the expenses of the
Yes, they do offer telehealth through our insurance plan as well. But yeah, so you have our health insurance program through Cigna with the telehealth, but then you also have the Employee Health Center that is managed by CARE ATC, and they recently rolled out that virtual option as well.
all of the staff there on salary, we're not paying for
Okay, and just some external factors that we typically monitor: the Consumer Price Index, Municipal Cost Index, compensation for state and local workers. This data, January, February, is the latest you can get right now. We can almost throw that out because we know the impacts that are going to be reflected within this, and so we still present the data that's available. You also have some horizon issues that you need to be aware of. As related to the public safety pensions, you can see that the fire's unfunded liability increased $720,000, and that was per their pension report this year, and that feeds into our budget for next year. But a lot of that increase was due to a fiscally responsible decision to adjust their assumed rate of return. They were up around, I believe, 8%, and then reduced that to not quite 7.5%, but they stepped it down, and they're going to continue to step down. And so when you adjust that assumed rate of return, extrapolated over all those years, it has a pretty significant effect. And so they're trying to do the right thing. It does have an impact, but it also trues up that pension fund, so we have a more realistic expectation of what we're looking at. And that's the same with the police. They did the same thing the prior year. They made that adjustment, and now you can see that their unfunded liability actually decreased $68,000. So that was good news. And we spoke about the health insurance costs. One other item with the transfer of Lee Winter Park, the county has a commitment to contribute those District 4 revenues of $60,000 a year all the way to fiscal year 2022. So that will be, we've got 2 more years of that. Those dollars are used, as you've seen a lot of improvements on that site down there for maintenance type activities. We do have the solid waste contract expires in fiscal year 2021. While it's an impact to our residents, it's also an impact to the city based on the current arrangement that we have with waste management, and so that is anticipated to go out to bid this next fiscal year. Of course, we're still very aware of potential natural or man-made disasters. We did talk about the reimbursements from the prior hurricanes, and then any future events that may occur could be an impact to that unassigned fund balance. We've been monitoring this for a few years as far as that the ruling on the internet sales tax. Many of the states had already implemented something, and Florida has implemented that to some degree. As far as, if you have a physical presence in the state, you have employees in the state, you're required to pay that online sales tax. Now, they haven't exercised that option across the board like many of the states, so we believe there's still some revenue on the table, but they've taken no legislative action to enact that at this point in time. As we talk about the capital improvement program for the city, we do use a matrix here to identify the priorities. So we're not just picking and choosing as far as what we would prefer or like to do with the CIP. These are really decisions based on mandates, requirements, and if we're fortunate, we get to those desired or nice to do. So if we talk about this is actually for fiscal year 2021. It says on the slide 20, departmental capital requests. Within the police department, they have a number of patrol vehicles that are a reoccurring cost. They are capital. We've seen those costs go up pretty dramatically as the manufacturers have moved away from passenger cars to SUVs. And so the request this year for 7 patrol cars and then 7 unmarked cars is $530,000. The victim's advocate within the police department, there's a grant out there that would pay for half of that vehicle, and the city's share is $24,000. That, of course, being contingent on the grant. The SWAT vehicle is very dated, and that's in the CIP for $128,000. A 3D laser scanner, which is really a crime scene tool that does a lot of measurements and analysis related to whether it's traffic or any other related crime on scene. Traffic response trailer. Radio replacement, those are the digital radios that the police department use, the portables. Those are very expensive radios, and they have a pretty high shelf life. At this point in time, we do have a maintenance contract on them, and we replace batteries, microphones, all those items that tend to break, the actual items themselves are still functioning. And so while that's an expensive cost, we did just replace those as the state moved to a digital radio system. We had to upgrade our radios, and so I think they're, close to 5 years old now, the oldest ones? Yeah, and so we are looking at those replacements. We do budget an amount to replace those broken throughout the year. Fire department, they have some extrication equipment within their proposed CIP, as well as a pumper truck. That's the big item for the fire department, $639,000. Fire inspector vehicle and active shooter equipment for the total of $708,000. So with that, we evaluated it, worked with our staff as far as, is this a must-do or is this a nice-to-do? And really looking at, when it comes to vehicles, what are the current maintenance requirements, and is it something that we must replace? And so within the police department, we really looked at the number of patrol vehicles being the most important operation and number of miles consumed annually, looking at making sure that we can continue to maintain that fleet and availability for our patrol officers that are responding to cars or to calls for service on a daily basis. And so that number has been reduced down to 7 actual patrol cars. And then the victims advocate vehicle, of course, that's pending grant funding. The SWAT vehicle, that unit continues to provide service, although not ideal operationally. It does continue to provide service, and we also looked at the number of call-outs related to that, and do not believe that would be a must-do at this point in time. The other items, the laser scanner, traffic response trailer, those are kept in the CIP, and the department will be submitting those in the budget. What we've asked them to do is when they put those items into their budget, that they prioritize them within their budget. So as we look at potential impacts of COVID-19 and we need to make cuts, they're already prioritized within the line items, so we know exactly how we can move through that to reduce those costs.
So when you say grant funding, does that mean we do $24,000 match?
That's our match, yes, ma'am. Fire department, extrication equipment, we'd be seeking grant funding for that. The big one on there, the pumper, meeting with our fleet staff, they invest about $7,500 in maintenance costs into the engine they'd like to replace, and that's a very important decision to push that out one more year, because if you decide to purchase a new pumper, you're looking at potentially an 18-month build time on that. So not only do you push it out 1 year, but then also the actual in-service date is out beyond what you may believe. Now there are some options related to that. You may have seen other pumper trucks that use the cabin chassis type model. There's a number of agencies that use those. Our agency uses these, and our staff is most familiar with these custom-built fire pumpers, and so we believe that can be deferred an additional year. We're not seeing the maintenance costs to the point of where we believe it would have to be replaced.
How old is the one that we have now? Do you know?
Is it an 02? Yeah, it's in 2002. And we previously refurbished one of the older ones 2 years ago. We still encounter a lot of bugs with that. So when they take something apart and modernize it and put it back together, it doesn't always go back together as it would from the factory. So this pumper may not be considered for that type of retrofit. Yes?
I believe that the cost, going back to Councilman Ross's question, the cost of
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
So it's,
Yeah, she was talking about the grant fund, and I thought that was the actual cost, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's the actual cost. So they would be seeking, and one of our staff members seeking grant funding, and then at that time, we would find out what that grant is. But those things are things that can be done with, the city making.
Yeah.
Right now, anyway, that would supplement the cost that we're looking for.
Yeah, because it didn't make it sense that this would be a match when we don't even know, you know. Yeah.
Different grant has different.
this is Public Works. This is very small font. I apologize. They have a number of items on here to include community services. If you recall, we did partner with Brevard Public Schools on that logistics training center that would be constructed at the Adult Education Center there off of Dixon and Clear Lake area, right behind Fire Station 1. We haven't heard anything on that, but the city's commitment to that submission of the grant was $100,000 in capital costs, and then there was a reoccurring, I think it was 12 or 20,000, 12,000, I believe, to ensure that we had COCO residents preference to attend those trainings. And so that's still pending out there. We haven't heard anything back on that. We previously submitted for it and were not successful. So this is the second go around. Within Public Works, you have a number of, and I'll just hit the highlights. Obviously, primarily is the annual street repaving, $300,000. And we're going to touch on that a little bit later, but as far as how much road resurfacing does that get you, and then what's the distance of roadway that you maintain? Are we meeting that degradation curve or not? And so we'll talk about that just a little bit. They need a new flatbed truck, Indian River Drive stabilization. That's really as you travel on Indian River Drive, that highest elevation point. We noticed it first during Hurricane Matthew. If you look at the guardrail there, it kind of peels out towards the river. The embankment's actually falling down, and so there's a potential risk, especially during storm season, that embankment, although it's on private property, could cave in and then take our roadway with it. And so we've done some evaluation on that. We estimate that project to be $550,000. We have, Brian, we have submitted that for grant funding under the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program.
Those are and so still with better private property expense or contribution?
So in order for us to do that type of project, we've been working with the property owner to at least allow us to enter into an agreement to do that work on their property. But they really, it's just an almost vertical embankment. They don't, they don't, it's not like a benefit to them where they can go out, put up chairs or anything like that. It's a sheer drop off. So
They didn't really have any use of the truck.
that's right. And yeah, there's a dock, I believe. But for us to compel a property owner to do it for the benefit of our roadway.
And we're just being proactive with the fact that, the road, we don't want the road to be taken out because it affects everyone.
Because, the benefit is
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that one's significant. We have completed the design on the Provost parking lot. That's on the east side of that park. That dirt lot area is reconfiguring that and establishing actual parking stalls. And that's something that they'll also evaluate with the Parks and Open Space Master Plan as well. And that should be eligible for grant funding as well. The next item I want to touch on is really a must-do, and it's a must-do now. Over at our fleet facility, we have underground storage tanks for diesel and gasoline, and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection did an inspection earlier this year and actually failed our tanks. So right now, if you've got to go over there and fill up with diesel, it's almost like a trickle coming out of there, and they're trying to piece it together to make sure that we can continue to provide that fuel. We did negotiate some contracts to be able to bring fuel on site temporarily in the event there is a hurricane. So we have that need met for now, but we are going to be starting the process of bidding that project this fiscal year to get those tanks taken care of.
Question: Are we looking to go back underground, or are we going to do the frac tanks?
They would be above ground, and you can see there's some above ground tanks there now.
Yeah.
But these would be even more modern than that.
Yeah, that's some of the new technology now. I mean, it's nice. I think they do it over in, let's say, they build these over in Ocala or somewhere over there.
Could be.
Yeah, it will be out above ground. All the piping will be above ground as well.
Yeah, I see a lot of stations are going to that now, and then they have the walls there to contain any.
Yep, and that includes some improvements to the island itself and the pumping, I believe. So, with that, the other significant items on that list, the police department roof. You may be aware of that. That's the original barrel tile roof. We've been monitoring that for at least the last 3 years. We put an additional amount of money in the budget to ensure that if there are needed repairs after certain rain events, we can do that. The last 2 years, we actually haven't had to really tap into that funding, so we've continued to defer that cost. There's a couple of HVAC needs here at City Hall, as well as the Cocoa Village Playhouse. There are some issues related to our elevator controllers with an update of the Florida Building Code that, at both the police department as well as the Porsche House. And so we're evaluating those. Those are cost estimates at this point.
Hey, Matt, real quick.
Yes, sir.
Going back to that roof, did we, during the hailstorm, did we normally have someone go up and inspect those after that hailstorm? Did that happen? I was just curious.
Yeah, we do through our insurance carrier. They come right on site, just like after the hurricanes, almost the next day. As soon as it's safe to travel, they're here on site. We take photos. Unfortunately, that barrel tile roof, it's either broken or not, and so it held up pretty well in that storm event. Yes, so old Fire Station 1, the administrative quarters on old Fire Station 1 currently has a leak in the roof, and there's deficiencies with the sewer lines. So from the city's perspective, as far as our use, we don't have a use for that portion. Now the bays and the outdoor confined area, we could potentially use that. And so the carrying costs of that administrative side, it would be better for the city to demolish that. I know there's some interested parties out there that we could go through a public process to see if they were interested in taking that over. But I'm not certain on the asbestos. There could be, but certainly mold. Yes.
There's some mold.
So we still need to include it into the budget in the event that we need to demolish that structure.
And just to add, there is an organization that's interested in it and have looked at it. So and they're willing to pay to get the roof done and all this other stuff and mitigate whatever needs to be done in there, upgrade the electrical and so forth. So and that'll be coming back to us as the councils as soon as they're able to.
Okay. And then, as you can see here, we evaluated those projects, and you can see a number of recommended deferments. The Public Works pole barn rehab, the police department roof replacement, police department generator replacement, the Porsche House elevator controllers. We're evaluating that. Is it even necessary to have an elevator? It wasn't original to the house. We do have a number of businesses that rent space on the second floor, but do we need to provide ADA accessibility in that structure. So.
I think at the time that it was remodeled, ADA accessibility was required of.
Okay.
Because of the uses that we have.
That's.
At the time, we actually did have a second floor use that included some people with disabilities. So that what's with the City Hall HVAC system? Because from my perspective, it was new.
Yeah, so it's often a meat locker in this room. There's 6 units total for City Hall and 2 for each floor. You may recall recently to council in this last year, we brought to you all to do an emergency replacement. We did that for 2 of the units. We'd replaced 2 prior. There's still 2 more remaining. And so we've got that in the capital plan for this next year to avoid any shutdown of those units. And then there's also, IT has their own separate one for that the database or server room that puts off a lot of heat. So the replacement for that one is actually a more of a residential, commercial scaled model rather than the industry-specific model that they have right now. So. And so that your total CIP request for the city's general fund is right at $2.3 million with those modifications, and of course continue to monitor that as we move forward and understand a little bit better picture of our revenue. We also have a number of community-based requests that we've received, and the first one in particular, going back a couple of budget cycles, the Brevard Public Schools, Cocoa High School. We actually have a meeting organized, I believe, in the next week or 2 to discuss this project. It's something that's been budgeted in fiscal year 19 and 20, and we continue to carry it. And so we've coordinated a meeting to resolve that and get this one off the books. So we anticipate that happening this fiscal year. The Brevard Museum, they had previously presented to City Council seeking $50,000 annually for 3 years, and that being for operational museum operations. The Cocoa YMCA is seeking $350,000. They also presented to City Council for repairs necessary for the roof, mechanical, facility improvements, as well as the swimming pool. Now, they've also approached Eastern Florida State College and other partners. So all of those repairs aren't just what would be completed with the city's $350,000, because from what I understand of their situation, that wouldn't even meet their swimming pool needs. So, yes, ma'am. That is correct. That's on city property, and then it was built, I think it was in the 70s, late 70s, with the Grace Trust Fund, and then they had certain artifacts that were to be preserved in that museum.
So,
yeah, and I know there's a scheduled a public tour for City Council that was supposed to be, I think, this last Saturday, and now it's in June. So I think we'll all have an opportunity to go there and see it firsthand. The city did. This council actually approved the agreement for the roof that the city made a contribution to. And it would be my recommendation that we finalize that interlocal agreement with Cocoa High School. That's something that's already in the budget. And then these other commitments, continue to evaluate those. And then at mid-year, depending on your revenue picture, you could potentially look at those items. This is just a summary of personnel requests, and as I mentioned before, that these requests would be held for evaluation at mid-year, consistent with revenue trends that we observe, actual revenue trends. And so there's a number of positions in here, a new payroll coordinator position, doing an ad pay for 6 meter readers and field service representatives to provide a more competitive wage, and then replacing over in the police department, the frozen school crossing guard position with a police officer trainee position. What that is that we have, for recruitment efforts, we have a number of folks that don't have a background or a certification, and so we found that if we can get them on the front end, a good candidate, and actually pay them as they go through the academy, we can get a commitment from them to come and work for us on the back end. And so we've already successfully implemented that program, and this would allow us to continue that. The senior license and permit tech position, a new one, to allow the community services department to be more efficient and better handle those permit requests and expedite those for our local contractors. The Public Works Department seeking an additional maintenance worker 2, and then transferring an employee that's a mechanic 1 to a fleet technician. Now, there's a couple of these positions that are just modifications to the existing employees. Those may be something that we consider regardless in this year's budget, absent adding new headcount. Within the Utilities Department, they have a number of positions related to the Dial Water Treatment Plant, as well as field operations. They would also be seeking to modify those water reclaim system coordinators to change their job description to be environmental control coordinators. And that would be an increase in their pay grade, resulting in a small increase overall to the utility fund expenses.
Now, do those amounts for the position, those include benefits?
Yeah, those costs are all inclusive of salaries, health insurance, pension, and when we talk about health insurance, it's assumed that they're going to be accepting family medical. So that would be the highest cost in the city, so we can, no matter who's hired, we understand the complete financial impact prior to. Okay, and then as we look at our budget development philosophy, from fiscal year 1920 and now 2021, you can see that philosophy has changed quite a bit based on the financial position that we believe we're going to find ourselves in. And that's shifted to maintaining our existing level of services to our citizens and customers, to make the necessary adjustments now, and as we continue to prevent layoffs and furloughs of our employees, being our most important asset to ensure that we can continue to provide those services, and then continue to reevaluate our position at mid-year next year, with continuously monitoring that through this budget cycle, development cycle, as well as fiscal year 2021 when that actually gets underway. We do have some projects within here that come from our assigned fund balance to include the enterprise resource program, and that's the software conversion, kind of the central nervous system of the city, if you consider our financials, as well as our land management files. Everything else, all of our other software ties into it. And so we've done a lot of evaluation related to this as far as our existing software that dates back to 1992, meeting the city's needs. It's been determined that it does not meet our needs. We do have a workshop with council programmed, just not scheduled yet, to brief you on that project in its entirety. We also have the roadway sidewalk construction. I talked about that. That gets us, that $300,000 gets us about 3 miles a year. And if we look at that, actually I believe it's 4 miles. Yeah, it's about 4 miles, because we have 79 miles of roadway in the city. So to meet that 20-year degradation curve, we need to do about 4 miles a year. And so this gets us, to be able to meet that 20-year threshold. It doesn't allow us to continue to penetrate into those roads that maybe have fallen beyond that. But at this point, with the conclusion of Pineda, we've met all those structurally deficient roadways in the city, and so we believe that to be a good plan moving forward. The implementation of the sustainability and the resiliency action plans. Economic development, of course, we hope to see those projects continue and ensure that the city's in a position to support those requests if necessary, and then continue to seek grant funding to supplement those expenses. And with that, I'd like to talk a little bit about, from City Council's perspective, how you see the priorities of the city moving forward. And I would ask you to consider that from really two perspectives. One being, the financial situation that we find ourselves in, and getting some sort of consensus on moving forward with ensuring that we maintain our existing levels of service, our existing employees, to prevent furloughs. And then secondly, what projects and initiatives would you like to undertake? So with that, we can have that discussion.
Have you looked at leisure services staff?
Yes, the question is related to our leisure services staff, who oftentimes serves those customers that have reservations, private venues, as well as reserve our city facilities. We're currently using those facility attendants while facilities are closed to events through June. We're using them to perform extra cleaning efforts throughout the city to supplement our custodial staff. And they've been performing very well in that function, and so we're going to continue that through the month of June. But we do anticipate those events continuing after June, based on the vendors that we've had communication with. Most want to postpone rather than completely cancel.
Well, I guess you're ready for our input, or?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll start off. And then some of my stuff is just simple. It's just, well, except for one, I think it's not too simple, but it's on Aurora. We go into the Sharon Center. I think it's so important that there is a sidewalk put there, because you go there on a day-to-day basis and you see folks just walking in the road. And it's, I know they got the little storm drains there or whatever. I've seen folks in walkers and they especially hover around and just in the road, just trying to get to the Sharon Center. It's our road. It was County Road, I guess, in City Annex that they're over.
We identified that one in our stormwater plan.
Okay.
The pipe the ditch was. We're going to try to see if we can come
Oh, okay. And then other than that, Matt, it's just invested more into some of these lawn services, these licensed lawn services in the city, to maintain our main thoroughfares and our intersection, and just clean up throughout the city. And some of our, especially the sites where people see day in and day out traveling through our city. You can go by there any day, and it's just, for some reason, some people just throw the trash out the windows or whatever. And, we just, the appearance says a lot, and we just want people to go out to our city and see a beautiful city and well maintained. And I know that other cities, and I'm not going to mention their names, I know that they actually have crews that a crew of two that goes out in the mornings and just drive and hit certain locations, certain main locations that people see driving through our cities. And just something that's what my thing is, just investing more in maintaining that, as well as identifying some of the benches in the city, like the one you have on Peachtree Street. I don't know, are they gone?
The one by the VOA, yes.
Oh, great. Okay, I missed that then. Okay, because I turned up firm, so I didn't around there. Okay. And but other than that, just doing a better job of just cleaning our city up and that appearance. Because perception is everything, man. And we've heard for years that the city of Cocoa is a diamond in the rough. Well, you know what? We've been saying that for years. I've been hearing it. I was hearing it on the council before. And it's time for us to do something with reference to polishing it up and just us completing some of the projects that we throw out there. You know, like the museum, the community garden, and the list goes on. I just, when we throw projects out there and we do these photo ops and all this other stuff, let's finish these projects. Let's stop, with all this, There's a lot of people that's out there that's willing to get involved at no cost to us, for their time and efforts, and we need to take advantage of that. So, that's it for me, other than the stuff that's happening already and doing well. And then,
One thing I do want to add on that grounds maintenance, just so you all are aware, with the COVID-19, maybe an unintended impact, we did have that inmate work crew that we contract with the state for, that can bring up to 8 workers on a daily basis to the city. They actually locked that program down.
Yeah.
And we don't know when that's going to come back. So Public Works they're working to maintain.
Definitely, it was shut down, but I just hope that's just, Oh yeah, and there was one thing, that roundabout right there in front of the Baptist church.
Yep.
That's something that's been in the books for years, just years, and it's just nothing's been done. And just completing that roundabout will make such a difference down here, and just moving forward with identifying, which I know you guys are doing already, identifying some additional parking for the downtown there so we can address those issues.
Yep, and both those items, we'll be bringing back to the CRA. So.
Okay. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's kind of in flux right now as far as, what we know about what our revenue losses are going to be and everything. I want to stay focused on our priorities and the things that we have to do forward. I also see a couple things we've got coming down the pipe that may impact us. Really difficult ways that we're going to have to address it probably in the budget, but the mayor's right. We can do a lot, do a little by cleaning up the appearance of the town. It seems like maybe because there's more people out, more people walking, maybe just because we don't have enough crew, we have a whole lot more trash on the side of the road than we've had in a long, long time. And one of the things that I see that, and I don't understand where we're falling down, and maybe this is something our sustainability committee can address. I watch children stand on the side of the road and use their storm drain trash. And stand in the bus stop, eat their breakfast, and throw their trash. So we're going to have to address that probably starting at the elementary school level, that our storm drains are not trash cans. It should be going on the bus while you're waiting for the bus, or you carry your drugs to school. That it's almost daily that I can. So that's a long-term fix, but it's something we probably can address now because of the impact further with our community. We have to continue what we're doing. I think we've been on a really good path. I am starting to see, especially in some of the things going on in the Central area, that we are going to have to address. Something that's going to cost us a lot of money, that's the salaries in our police department. Some of our neighboring communities have increased not only their salaries by $10,000 to $15,000 a year starting salaries, but they've increased the numbers that are hiring for Orange County and 70 and 80 budget new hires. I mean, they're offering $15,000 more a year than they're offering starting salaries. You can drive your car home from the work camp, you can live here. And our guys with 2 or 3 years of experience, they're going to give you more money. We have huge turnover coming over in our police department at the end of the year, we're replacing our police. And we're going to have a mass exodus if we don't address those out there. Because, you know, if I'm going to go to work for any police chief anyway, I might as well go somewhere where the rest of me on that. So that's going to happen. We're going to lose a huge number of people if we don't address that salary issue. So that's my biggie. Other than that, I think our department's doing a great job, but that's my biggest concern because the last thing I want to see is us have to call Sheriff Biden for help with the city.
Yeah, and you know, the police business is almost the same no matter where you go. So, you know, unless you're committed to a certain agency, why would you not choose to be compensated at a higher level? So.
Yeah, and if you look at the things that are being said by, you know, the sheriffs and police and, you know, and they're saying, hey, the people we're offering. We have people who have left here, who are friends with people in Brevard County, who are saying, hey, I'm making 20 grand more a year than you are, and I'm not having to work extra details to get it. And if I work an extra detail, I'm making 6 figures a year. There was former Cocoa police officer who's averaging $120,000 a year, living on Merritt Island, driving to Orlando for work, and he spends all day, every day, recruiting our office of associates. And I don't blame him. $120 grand a year is not a lot of people to do it. I mean, we're not even paying some of our department heads that much money. So, we have to do something. We have to figure out a way. If we can't do it in salaries, we have to figure out some benefits that make those people working here, especially when we've already spent the money to train them. I mean, we're losing them after we spent $20,000 or $30,000 to train them, and then they're going someplace else. So let's think about it. We have to fix that. And this is, with the chief leaving, we gotta do that. Anyway, that's my conclusion.
Okay.
Thank you. Councilman Bover.
Yes, sir. I don't know, she must be reading my mind because I was going to say the same thing that Brenda just said, because it's honestly and truthfully, if we don't get to the program, we're going to lose a lot of good help. And I think it's time that we buckle down. You know, I noticed in the budget we get $350,000 for the Y. That money can be used for benefits and raises for our city employees. Let's take care of our own before we start taking care of everybody else. We're not the bank or Cocoa. We're City Hall and we're here to run the city. I think we should take care of our city employees before we start dishing out money to every Tom, Dick, and Harry that asks us for money. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah, that was just on their wish list. I mean, that's
Yeah, that's not being included in the budget at this time, sir.
Councilman.
Okay, well, I apologize for that.
No, that's all right. No, you're fine.
The way I understood it on this end.
No, you're fine.
I apologize for that statement.
No, sir, you're fine. Councilwoman Cost.
I think, yeah. Big movements. But we do have a couple of things that hope we like to say that I think, Councilman Warren mentioned, the increase of the activity. But I'm hoping that in particular will be something that we see increase overall, given the pandemic and the related reasons in the outside. So, I'm hoping that, we will stay between our focus on stormwater management, along with incorporating our parks plan, looking forward is really nurturing our outdoor spaces, our corridors, because as I mentioned in the session fashion, I do want to see, and this is new, but I do want to see an emphasis on Spanish language of our staff. Recently, read something I think they're I don't know the specific. We'll be getting updates from the census soon, but we've had a significant increase in our Spanish-speaking population. And, had the opportunity now to get a couple of occasions where we had staff that are fluent Spanish. Increase quality of communications there and our ability to, take care of our citizens. I think we'd be enhanced by that. I think it's a relatively low expense, but particular priority would be to increase the fire department, but also in all of our staff that has interaction. That would be a good
Yeah, that's.
Somehow that we looked at some incentives as well as the opportunity, even if it's on people's own time, to study Spanish.
Okay.
Local groups that are teaching it, it's not just Spanish, we actually have local groups who hold classes in Portuguese because we're having to speak and people in our area speak Portuguese. So we've got a church who's actually holding Portuguese classes right now. They might have to go a little more difficult. But we do have several groups in the community that are helping with Spanish and English classes. But maybe we can partner with that. We've done a great job with the police department. We've got a lot of experience.
Yeah, it's without a doubt something that's continuing to trend. I was out in front of City Hall just 2 days ago, and there was a Spanish-speaking water customer. Well, I've had immersion classes. It wasn't related to customer service, so I had to go in, and fortunately we had a rep right there, and they do receive an additional pay for having that, but they were able to satisfy their needs, and so yeah, it's an essential component of our work.
Yeah, so that, and then one other thing which is somewhat related to the outdoor spaces and the sustainability and resilience. I don't think, having seen some of that kind of, don't know that there's a lot of extra expense there. Some cases, but I've been thinking a lot about community gardening. I know that we have a couple of experiences with that out there. I think it's really worth looking at again. Not that we really want to places, but teaching some sort of training or making those skill sets available in our community. Would be helpful. And I don't know if that's some sort of partnership. IFAS is some dedicated staff time who's getting going. I'm talking about larger scale and people actually paying a small amount of rent and the costs. And then some education on nutrition going along with it. So we'd like to see this, that may be, a project for more input in sustainability advisory. Given these prices, that's
Okay.
I'm seeing a lot more people putting in gardens this year, particularly the places like Lowe's and Home Depot or Tractor Supply. That's walking out of the stores for personal garden. Gas is increased.
really, I'm looking at long term. Oh, this is the inflation.
And beginning to wish I had bought one of those picks from the 4-H kids and which
Yeah.
I mean, it gets that. Probably won't stay that big for a while. So, I've also noticed we have a increase in chickens in our community lately, so that means that helps do that.
Oh, yeah.
Big increase in chickens lately.
Is that it? And let me say something real quick. I forgot, and actually one of my biggies that I just remembered because I hadn't jotted anything down. But yeah, but one thing I'd like to see, hopefully, within the next 3 years, anyone I'd like for the city to have all the employees under $15 an hour to be brought up to $15 an hour some way. If it's a 3-year plan, or it can happen over a 3-year period of time. Because I see it coming down the pipes, and there's no reason why we couldn't start it. I know there's some other cities that already got it in place. And then also, I'm a true believer that anyone that's invested 15 years of their time into a city or any business should be close to topping out in pay. And I think 15 years or 20 years, by the time you get to 20 years, you should be topped out in pay. You should never retire or leave your job within spending 25, 30 years in your job and never topping out in your pay. I just think we need to kind of look at that a little bit, because when you look at these guys that's been there 15, 20 years, these are the guys that are training the future individuals that are coming in to fill these positions, and so they're very valuable to us, and I don't think that we give them enough. And they should top out and pay at least by 20 years, but should be on the way to topping out after 15 years.
Yeah,
They're very valuable to us.
I think I understand what you're saying, but I wouldn't want to top them out, because that means they can't continue to earn higher wages. But
no,
I understand what you're saying, being in the upper threshold of the range, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think of something too that, I've been pursuing before, and still haven't come up with a plan. But I really think there's some benefit to encouraging our employees to have some sort of incentive for employees that do it. And I know we've got 50-some employees of 400 roughly. Most of those are in the board.
Actually, you can
Salary.
I had a neighbor, a local employee who moved in on my street every day, but we paid down payment on our home. We forgave contributions from our other programs, and we forgave, and I think it actually ran probably $2,000, but we forgave that down payment, and that person is now retired from the house. So it was a way to get our employees into the city, buying a home, not renting, when they couldn't save the money for down payment. Over a course of years, we did that down payment, so they stayed in the home, after they're not decided. Yeah, so it seemed to work, and it's a pretty good incentive to get, not the employees to live in the city, but to get people to come to work.
Oh, yeah.
And that's something that isn't necessarily costly to us without anyone with whatever happened to that program. You still have it?
Yeah, the only thing that we have is in my every time, I want to see employees, but with the state of California, probably 1/7. We aren't in California. We have money in the probably have employees.
Maybe we could take a look at that.
Change it.
Yeah,
Make it better than, especially for some of our
very
critical
healthy for the model, because that's about, it'll be $30,000 to $40,000.
I was gonna say that's the starting salary for police fires. It might be a recruiting tool for the park too, to do it.
For 10 years, we've
Because I know Chad and some others, work for the city. Yeah. Because I'm just a true believer that, you know, you take care of your employees and the happier they are, man, I'm telling you, man, the work productivity, man, would certainly change, I guarantee you. And then you'll see some of your vacation and sick time, you know, you'll start to see those numbers go down. Because I just think that we got some great employees, and I think that, you know, I don't, you know, I heard that whole adage that, you know, we make them look good. No, they make us look good. Everything they do that's good out there, and which is a lot, it reflects back on us. And I think the happier they are, I think the more we're going to benefit as leaders. You know. But Deputy Mayor Goins, I'm sorry.
This year's budget process to me is sometimes difficult because you want to see responsible. But also you want this thing to come to us very hard. Yeah, but there's a few things that I have with community services. We have a rent issue. And I see we have a lot of rents. We are really trying to work hard. And that part trying to bring more family to the city. And we know we need more funding in that part. And that's something I think that we really need to look into. I know we have issues that we may be facing that we really need to invest in the family, invest in definitely.
That's the county has that, and you know, everything.
The city actually, the city,
Okay.
yeah, the city actually received that direct allocation, and it's actually coming before you at the next city council meeting that lays out the based on the rules what those uses could be, and it's essentially just coming into the existing programs that we have.
Because that came down from the county as well.
Since we're a entitlement community, we actually received the direct allocation. It's just in the account, and we didn't have any rules on what we could do with it.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of strange, but we did receive. Yeah.
Really referring to like my lake subdivision. I think we have 19 odd lots that we own. And then we can offer some assistance to those families with lots of also dealing with microseed lake, installing those utilities that we don't yet have installed right now. I know it'll be more efficient. Because there is water and those sewage stuff out on those lots. So we don't have to spend it. Especially if you're trying to keep that mortgage or that price down. You know, that could be potentially $8,000 less. And you have some spots.
Yeah, the public housing that existed there previously doesn't necessarily line up with the subdivided. Yeah. And you know, it's also maybe something that you consider. I know the Diamond Square CRA has a budget for it this year, but if you were to bring a developer to the table that was interested, let them make the improvements, and then the CRA participate, because I don't know what they're, you know, we're seeing a lot of unique designs for homes, at least in that affordable housing market right now, and I would hate to install, you know, sewer and water laterals and not fit what they can provide us. So we can still do that and participate, I believe. Something to consider.
And Deputy Mayor, just real quick, there is actually 2 groups that are going to be coming before the council. They just are not doing it right now because it's COVID-19 deal. They want to. And I told them to maybe hold back until, about April, sometime in April, and possibly get them on the agenda then. But they're actually 2 groups coming forward with some of the same stuff that you're talking about. So, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Dealing with the police, we kind of piggyback on the Councilman Warren that was talking about. I think you're absolutely right. Just competing on salary and/or benefits. Benefits could be something dealing with the education portion. Some of the officers who want to go to college. I know right now, just doing with slight research, we're competing with a lot of other departments and because of the incentives that we pay for A, B, whatever it is, master degrees or DES, just looking into that area to just compete with other. You can't do it salary-wise, which you should be able to do, at least try to. At least look at that benefits portion. I think a lot of officers would benefit from that. I know a lot of them want to go to the next time. All they can do that is go to college. Some people can't afford it. We discussed cameras a lot this year. Nothing has been done dealing with cameras except for housing authority. Just enhancing that, whatever that means. To it. If we have to tap into the housing authority or move a little bit more, I think it's helped the officers. If they can't be there, they can, we discussed before, go on a laptop and you have a software set up where they can click on that, hit that address. Yeah, that camera set up in those high crime areas like malls. But enhancing security, I think that's
How about in the department?
definitely part. And we've been discussing that dealing with provost and burning process for so long. I'm not talking about we can spend the money and get it done. Because in those areas we see, those are headaches for our officers. It's getting worse and worse by the day. I'm getting calls from a lot of residents right now, man. That people walk around like zombies right now. I don't know what they own, I don't know what they sell. It's becoming, it's bad when you can't enjoy your own house. It's bad when you can't enjoy your neighborhood because of people that may not even live inside their neighborhood coming in and just taking over. So I think that technology will help our officers and help our community as a whole. But they can't be here all the time. And I know sometimes they may be called away, what about when that car leaves? They happen. So that those cameras will help us a lot. Public works, I know the big thing is storm drain. We talked about kids throwing trash inside the drain. There's a lot of new technology out now where they have those not a soft drain, but it's kind of like a cover in the front of it, where it stops the trash, but it still maintains the flow of water. So instead of trash going inside it, it just lays inside this little pond. You might have seen it before. It's kind of a net type of deal. Just investing in technology, dealing with this storm drain. You have a lot of that going on where so much trash is inside these drains, and it stops the flow. The right of way extension may take away kind of concern. And I know we have to do it with financing. But a lot of our right of way comes with the sheriff department to stop doing the cutting of the code. But beforehand, it was a major issue because they only come once every blue moon. And a lot of the major areas like the Lake and Rose or the those high areas like around Wawa is not being taken care of to the way I think it should be. I think maybe because that position is not there, you don't have that guy. That's his position, that's his sole job, to make sure our right of way is on point. But I do understand
And that position, those duties are going to transition. So there's going to be someone out there doing exactly what you said, but I can tell you I'm going to see it in the budget request from Public Works related to grounds. I already know that's coming, so.
Also, I got an email about the new speed limit sign where it's a flash of speed limit. So sometimes we can't have our trailer out, and we only have, I don't know how many trailers do we have for speed limit. So it's a lot of streets, especially the street that I live on. It's like a NASCAR roadway. It's 60, 70, 80 miles an hour on road. That's crazy. So maybe investing, maybe possibly we could look into how much it costs to put those flash speed limit signs. I've seen signs that say slow down. You know, people go by. I think that possibly, I'm not sure.
Yeah, we're actually working on that this year. In the police department's budget, they have an additional speed trailer, and then we looked at the options that are available. Much like you're talking about, we've got some problem areas to post those signs and then continue to put those out. Obviously, the police department, public works, they know how to operate them, but you don't always want to just display the speed, because then sometimes you induce that speeding so people can see how fast they go. And a lot of those signs now will either shut off or just flash instead of read out the speed. But yeah, they're evaluating those options right now. So.
But that was really good. I understand why you made some cuts in there, but I still want to see a few things fall back. That's all I really had.
Okay.
No, but here, everybody has announced, all of our neighboring communities have announced $10,000. That's the Orange County.
Orange County,
Yeah, I mean, we'll continue to monitor that. I still think that, as we look at even our local market, there's some inequities, but as you look at Central Florida and the reductions, Rebecca, did we see from Orange County yesterday what they were looking at? Double-digit percentage. Yeah, so we'll see how their plans change, but, even at the existing, if we do a snapshot right now, they're still.
And that's a really, and it's not. So we have added issue of changeover in administration, which opens a lot of people up to a lot of time.
Okay. Any other comments or questions related to that? If not, we do need to get some consensus related to building the proposed fiscal year 2021 budget related to the revenues that we then build those expenses around, and that would be related to the millage rate and within Stantec's plan maintaining that 5.9790 rate into next year, and obviously we won't know what those projected increases will be until roughly June timeframe. That we could be more confident in what kind of revenue that would generate. And of course, this isn't to adopt a millage rate. That doesn't occur until the actual budget hearings. So it's just to provide us some guidance as we build that budget, and then also the fire assessment rate with the 3% increase, and just looking for city council consensus on that.
Yeah, I have a problem with the millage rate, the fire assessment rate. That's just already pretty high. I hear from my constituents. So that projection is how many really intelligence?
Sure, and the Stantec evaluates that rate annually, and that's presented publicly. So, at this point in time, we're just seeking a consensus, but that would be an appropriate time to look at, well, how does our rate compare to others? One thing that we got to keep in mind is our methodology may be different than the county, than other comparables, so there's some factors to really weigh there, but that's something that when Stantec does that evaluation, they can also provide you some information on how we compare.
But that's basically like paying for our new fire stations.
Yeah, and the fire assessment doesn't cover the cost of our entire fire service. I mean,
Under 40%.
yeah, it's just under 40%, I believe, is where we're at right now as far as cost coverage. But, that's...
And I can tell you where I'm going. I think that it maintain the current millage rate. And then as far as the fire assessment, I think just maintain where it is right now and maybe look at it as we move forward to see, what happens and what kind of adjustments are we're making. I said because looking at everything that's happened, how this, we don't know a whole lot about what's going to happen with this COVID-19 and moving forward. And I just think that folks are facing a lot now. I just can't make a good, sound decision on moving forward with that right now until we see where we are. And if we have to make some adjustments as a city, then we'll make some adjustments so we're not putting that burden on the taxpayers.
Unfortunately, it is a whole new world, and when we started out the first few years, we had a lot of increased projections for the tax. Apart from being active, so it's hard to make decisions. You don't know what you're going to be doing. I think we just have to be planning for the worst case scenario and prepare for that. The worst case scenario is that our expenses are going to go up, but our citizens are not going to be able to support an increase. So, the millage rate, fortunately, we have a little bit of time before we have to finalize. Definitely have time. I want people to have more money on the job.
I told that about, and I also enjoyed potential is a great for the conversation about our renters, dealing with our homeowners, putting dealing with the homeowners.
For the water, yep, water and sewer.
I'll be getting a lot of phone calls, and I know our staff is going to detail, dealing with investigating who's in the house, who can leave. It's hard for them to keep over. And it's causing a lot of stress in our department, and I can witness of this stress speaks to the but I understand what staff is going through because it's so difficult to keep up. When someone break up with this girl, break up with this guy, maybe you lose or whatever. Now their name is in the other one, putting the baby name into the water bill, and all kinds of stuff. It's very hard. I do know that the owner not know right now. But I think it's something you need to look into. Other than that, I think we have to set the number of $2.4 million of money that is left on the table right now. For water. conversation we can have, like, stuff is probably gonna come out streaming. But a lot of these people are making a lot of money.
Just a suggestion, if we really want to storage, if we want to start with buy-in, we'll do the 50-50, the workers, take 50-50 workers to buy in, and moving some of those voters to property owners as opposed to the renters. And there are property owners who include water.
Like apartment company.
Yeah, but we have a lot of our properties, especially here in Local, are managed by professional property managers. Those are the people who need to have buy-in, and experience done by those people. You don't have Tammy down at Facebook, Stabilization Fund, and have a conversation with her. And put together a meeting with some of those, and I know several years ago, that was there, and we sat down and some of those people that were there and voted for it. And needed to buy in for the real estate. So a really good place to start because there's several thousand of them kind of way. So if you want to bring that forward, that's a really good place for you to start with their buy-in at a time. You'll have a whole lot less trouble. You look at our rental properties, we have used where the city code or residential, why we do things that they want to do, but it's also possible to buy into the majority of property management companies that at least people come in a huge section.
You're saying you want the
Instead of being into the winner's name, so like like you live in an apartment.
well, you know what that's going to do, right? They're going to raise the cost of the rentals.
But no, it should be the amount of your water bill that you're going to your name. If you pay $1,000 a month, your water bill is $60, you pay $1,000.
No, but when you have that lease and that contract, it's for a set amount. So they're going to have to try to guess what you might be spending in water bill. If not, your monthly payment will be changing every month. And then let's say if you have like an incident like we've had a couple times where someone's left the water on or someone's turned the water on, it was like a $800 or $900 bill, then that a homeowner or whatever is going to say, wait a minute. But anyway, Anthony might want to chime on that if he has anything to say. Mr. City Attorney?
Yes, Mayor. What was the question?
He was talking about...
It's related to the utility accounts being in property owners' names versus the tenants.
And rentals.
Well, what's the question, though? I mean, didn't we just modify that policy, though? Require that, and when it's possible, have the account in the property owner's name.
We make the property owner or whoever's trying to start service responsible for showing us they're allowed to be in that property, which does entail, getting permission from the property owner. But we don't require a property owner to have it on in their name. It's not a requirement right now. A tenant can put it on in their name anytime. They just have to prove they have the right to be in there by lease or other methods. Property managers show us a property management agreement. So we're making the owners more responsible for who's moving into their properties before we put the water on in the tenant's name. But we still do allow, I think what Councilman Goins is saying is that he, well, I know it's what he's saying because I did talk to him a little bit about it, is that, not in the future, there are some cities that require the water account, utility account, stay in the owner's name and never transfer into the tenant's name, and always making the owner responsible. It's a better method to collect debt. You could lien the property. When a tenant defaults on a debt, you're out of luck unless they try to come back into the system again, and we force them basically to pay their back debt, which is what staff spends a lot of time currently doing, checking leases, checking facts, making sure who's on the lease, making the right people responsible for the water bills. So I believe that's what Councilman Jones.
And just to add, I know there is some recovery.
We spent I think about a year ago or so, we spent a significant amount of time going over this issue. I just can't remember all the details off the top of my head, trying to put the city in the best position to secure payment of the water bill.
We did, and the part I believe you're talking about, Anthony, was when there's unauthorized water usage, like a tenant did not set up water service with us and just started using the water, or even an owner just started using the water without starting service, we make the owners responsible for that until we secure and set up an account and whoever is supposed to be. But the owners are always responsible for the unauthorized water usage. We don't put that on a tenant. Even though a tenant might be in there using the water, they never came in to set up service with us. That's what we fixed a year ago. We make the owners responsible for that.
And I know, like anything, if you're included, if you're paying my water and my electric, and then if I have a set fee, I can guarantee you during the summertime, that air conditioning going to be cranked down to about 60 or 54. And I can guarantee you my water, I'm going to let it run for an hour before I go get in that shower because I know I'm not paying any extra. But I mean, that's just some of the stuff that you would face as a property owners would face, in that case. But I understand where you're coming from.
I want to bring an argument.
Oh, yeah.
But we'll put together the data.
Bring it to the table. Council don't like it.
Yeah.
We'll put together some information for council to review, as well as prior actions that have been considered by council. This has come before them before, so we'll get that information and bring it to you.
Oh, yeah.
And if we're in a great revenue, we can start to get places we can pay some.
And there are recovery companies that I know. I've met them at some of these conferences I've gone to. That's for a certain portion or percentage. They would go after these individuals that owe the cities for stuff like this, and yeah.
Well,
We do that after a certain time.
yeah, we do. But it's important to remember this is all utility fund related. This doesn't have anything to do with revenues for general fund.
Yep. And so before we move on to the utility fund, I just want to get some confirmation on the millage rate, maintaining that, building the budget around that, and then the fire assessment rate. What I heard was some disparity between maintaining as well as the current rate, or looking at that 3%. Maybe for City Council to consider is allowing us to build the budget on that 3%, letting Stantec present what the impacts are. We can identify reductions within those budgets to meet that, and that way we're prepared. So it still allows council to move either direction. Okay.
Because I do believe the 3% is in the resolution, Anthony, like an automatic 3% fire, although we do.
And we
bring it
just
back.
update the, yep.
Yeah, it's like an automatic 3%. It's in the plan, it's in the resolution. We would have to probably change that if we were not going to have an increase one year. I believe in the resolution, I'd have to have Anthony confirm it, that the 3% is an automatic increase. And then we have to, so if we're going to alter from that, just like we do for water or anything else, because we have a lot of those automatic, and then we bring them back to council to review, and you decide whether or not we're going to go that route, we would have to, if it is decided eventually that we aren't going to have the 3%, we would have to address that, because I believe it is automatically built in.
Yeah, I think so too, because we went off of the burden model and the projections to pay off indebtedness. And we'd have to look at the resolution, the rate resolution for the fire assessment. I think it's slightly different than the water rate resolution.
Yeah, if you're going to decide to do a bond. Okay, so that would really be that.
I couldn't say for certain that this is a done deal. It's we'll research the resolution.
I would bring it up just because that is like one thing that coach about numerous occasions, because it stands out.
With that, we'll move on to the enterprise funds, water and sewer fund. Those projections, the revenue projections, currently based off of Stantec's 2019 report, keeping in mind that Stantec is currently in the process of doing that full rate study related to the water utility and sewer and reclaim system. And so that will be completed this okay. We can pause for a moment if you. Okay. Okay, if we're ready to resume. Prior to moving into the enterprise fund, I did want to mention we did receive a public participation comment. Typically for in the workshop setting, it's a discussion amongst council, but if you would like to, we could read that comment in.
Okay, we have a comment from a citizen, Candace Rogers, at 93 Delanoy Avenue, Cocoa, and the message was sent to all of council as well. It says, not knowing what the city revenue will be, I will be somewhat generic in my request for consideration. Stormwater should be a priority for all of Cocoa. Parking basics in the village should be implemented to include electronic wayfaring signage to include location and availability. If possible, an app should be considered with like information. Parking enforcement should be conducted consistently with VCOPs with a golf cart type vehicle to patrol the village, Lee Winter Park parking lot, and other city parking lots. A parking land bank can be initiated for future needs. No public parking garage can be considered without a sound foundation of parking policy in place. While the tax revenue may be too short for long-term commitments, if sufficient grant money can be secured, a fishing pier feature would be a positive addition to the waterfront. Lee Winter Park was transferred from the county to the city, and it is our responsibility to maintain it as a sense of pride and an economic generator. I am not sure at this time we can acquire or take on additional maintenance costs for other county parks and recreation centers. It may be best to work with the county for additional or better maintenance. I believe our police department should be offered competitive pay to attract quality personnel and avoid poaching by neighborhood law enforcement entities. As a resident of the village, increased safety enforcement should be doable with cameras to assist in prevention and apprehension. Additional lighting in dark areas of the village is a low-cost fix for added safety. The residents were happy that the public restrooms were rehabbed, but funding for a restroom attendant for this restroom should assist in preventing it from slipping into a junkie haven or flop house. Many of these suggestions regarding the village could come from the CRA budget and could take some pressure off the broader city budget. As we face reduced revenues, if there are not sufficient funds for the Civic Center, there should be no consideration for alternate locations. During uncertain times, it is important to adhere to the master plan and not an excuse to override the wishes of the majority of the citizens. Kindest regards, Candace Rogers.
So is this just her stuff she's throwing out there? Is this coming from a group? Is it coming from
This was
just curious.
It was an email that was sent from Candace Rogers.
Oh.
It was an email from her.
From her. Okay.
Okay, thank you. And so we'll move into the water sewer fund. I think we started on that, and the prior year analysis projects a 5% annual rate adjustment, and that's approved annually by resolution by City Council. Right here you can see this is the Stantec projection model that was used to build our fiscal year 2020 budget that projects those 5% annual rate increases to fiscal year 2024, and then starting in fiscal year 2025 providing that 4% annual increase. And then also included on there you can see, based on an average consumption of 5,000 gallons, the residents' water bill right here. This chart right here is very important as it relates to the 6-month O&M for the water utility. Of course, in our master bond resolution, It requires 4 to 6 months, and we do anticipate this fiscal year, as we reviewed some accounts that we had for prior debt issuance, there are some dollars that we believe we will get to that 6-month threshold this fiscal year. So we're working on that right now, and that puts the enterprise system in a good position as we look at further uncertainty. Even though we're seeing the numbers we are right now, there's still uncertainty as to how this is all going to play out. And you can see in the cash in, cash out, those lines are right on top of each other, and so that looks good. The CIP funding, that's a combination of cash funding as well as what we do through borrowing. And you may recall in 2018, the city did that borrowing for, I believe, $43 million. Those projects are still under execution right now. There's about a year and a half remaining in that term for execution, and those projects are on track to include. Recently, City Council approved that CC RIP project, the chemical conversion reliability upgrade for the Dial Water Treatment Plant. That's a $20 million plus project that's underway currently. That will use a large portion of those debt dollars. It is projecting that in fiscal year 21, there's about a need for about $10 million of borrowing, and that is obviously annually evaluated. And when they do the full rate study this year, those results come back, and we look at not only the rates but the capital programming. We may see those numbers shift a little bit. Some of the key observations, I did mention that full rate study that's underway. The further spend down of that 2018 Series B bond, and we mentioned the downgrade early on in the presentation, but the enterprise utility continues to maintain strong debt service coverage. That would put us in a position that should Jack's capital program continue as it has been and those borrowing needs be there, we're looking at good interest rates as well as good debt carrying capacity by the utility. So this has proven to be a good system and positioned the water utility well to continue those future investments. And continue to maintain those reserve balances to stay in that minimum target of 4 to 6 months of O&M per the master bond resolution. On the presentation, it's in fiscal year 2021, but we believe we're going to reach that this summer, which is also good news. What I've received some questions as far as, well, our general fund seems to trend a little bit behind for revenues. The enterprise system, you continue with the billing monthly, and we should be seeing some of the results, and we can obviously track the water that we're producing as well as the consumption through the meter reading. And so what we know right now in March and April, that consumption has increased 14%. And that's somewhat interesting because with the port, their operations being not as normal and they're a large user, that consumption is still increased. And so we believe it to be attributed to the number of folks staying at home during the Safer at Home order and the use of water to meet their daily needs, as well as I know Patrick Air Force Base, their consumption is up quite a bit as well. So even though those hoteliers beachside were all but shut down, and they account for a lot of consumption on a regular basis, we still saw that increase in March, likely due to the Safer at Home order. But we're going to continue to monitor that, and related to the billing side, we're still seeing those payments being made timely. Even though we've waived the fees and the cutoffs, The payments are still coming in timely, and in fact, our customer service reps have been proactive in reaching out to those customers that haven't made a payment to set up a payment plan, and many of them have actually elected not to, surprisingly. So this is good news, but I believe if we see this continue, we're really going to see some deferment and some collection issues. We're pretty early on right now. And then just to touch on some of the larger capital projects projected in the next fiscal year's requests, a total of $10.2 million within their CIP, $1.3 million related to the water main at Sykes Creek. Some of you may recall during Hurricane Irma, there was some scouring on that Sykes Creek bridge, and it became unstable, and so they shut the bridge down to vehicular traffic, of which it has remained. The Army Corps of Engineers stabilized that bridge, but it has our water main that runs along State Road 528 attached to it. And so to provide a level of resilience for future storms, we actually completed a design to underground that pipe, take it off the bridge, underground it, so we didn't have to worry about anything the county was going to do with the bridge, and we would still be able to provide that potable water service to the northern barrier islands. And so that's in the budget. May be eligible for grant funding as well due to the needs that it does service. We do have $2.5 million program for pipe infrastructure and replacement, and that's what we do continuously annually as cities, the county, they program roadway projects. These are items that we may not be aware of, but when we're made aware of, we have funding to be able to participate and lower our costs to replace those utility lines. So that's an ongoing expense that we carry as a capital expense. $1.1 million for the utilities program management. Lift station 1 replacement. That's for the sewer utility, and I believe that one, Jack, is right down by Oleander Point. And that one we've also submitted through the state's hazard mitigation grant program for dollars on that, but we still have to expend those dollars to receive them reimbursed. A new well 17 out in the well field is $1 million, and then non-capital CIP, including vehicles and equipment, of $474,000, and then the significant operating costs to include a utilities portion of the enterprise resource plan, and then the reoccurring repairs and maintenance to the system. So with that, just like to get some preliminary consensus from City Council related to that 5% annual increase projected in Stantec's study. I did mention on multiple occasions they're doing that full rate study this year, so that may change, but based on revenues that are coming into the utility system and projected expenses. So just looking for some sort of consensus from City Council so we can continue to build that budget for fiscal year 2021.
And last year, the increase was 5%.
Yes, ma'am.
The year before that, it was 4 or
5.
5.
Yep.
Another year was,
I think it was 4 the year.
It was 4. Yep.
And then there was a year with none.
There was a year with 0, and then we went to 3 the next year. Yep. 3. Yep.
Okay, I know for me at this time, once again, I know they could do their models for both, but that's what I like to see, but just moving forward, right now, I'm just kind of in the middle of the road with this as well. So just have to see, I just have to see a little bit more of what's going to be happening here over the next couple of months.
you still get models for both.
That's right, and it's a full rate study, so they look at all of the all of the costs that go into providing the service. And so
The same thing was happening with fire assessment, right? There would be models for both.
yeah, they'll do the models, but the full rate assessment looks at all those costs and revenues and puts that together to redesign the rate going forward, much like we did with like the stormwater last year. And so, that will really, I think, allow you not just to see the model, but understand all of everything else that feeds into it, and it really trues things up. So, this comes back at the same, I think the meeting prior to the budget, the millage adoption. So it's late August typically, I think that second meeting.
Yeah, August 12th.
Same time as the fire assessment, is it?
No, August 12th is utilities, and then August 26th is fire.
Okay, yeah. Yep. Okay. And then we want to touch a little bit on the stormwater enterprise system. Before we go, you all are aware that we did the full rate study methodology change this past year. We've implemented a capital plan, and then also as a decision by City Council was to review that annual rate increase annually. And so what they had projected was that 9% for 3 years, and City Council had elected to bring the information back based on the execution of the capital, our ability to secure grant funding to see where we're at, to continue to carry out that capital plan. And you can see that 9% increase to those rates would equate to $165,000, and the annual impact for the average taxpayer is $9.96. Of course, you all know that we set up the tiers, so based on those tiers, it's a disproportionate amount for each one. There are still some significant capital projects projected in there. The Fisk Boulevard, Broadmoor Acres drainage and construction of that, and then their annual pipelining program that recoats the storm drains. There's several other projects that, they're really, as we continue to move through the budget, looking at front-loading the engineering on, so that we're in a position to take advantage of grants that may become available. In a lot of cases, they require you to be shovel-ready, so trying to get to that point so we have a lot of these projects staged. When something becomes available, we can maximize the dollars. So with that, just looking for some consensus or discussion from City Council related to the rate. Obviously, this will come back before you through the model, as well as some discussion on the execution of capital and what the needs are for the utility.
Yeah, just as long as they come back with some, like this one here with a 9% increase, I mean, just multiple models within that range. Just everything right now, it's just, I'm sure a lot of cities are going to be going through the same stuff, not knowing, what's going to happen next month, even next week.
Yeah, so what we can do is we can continue to build that budget based on the capital plan and Stantec's report, and then as it comes back this year, they present the updated information through the modeling. We can plan our budget accordingly to either make the cuts or bring in those projects either way. So, okay. With that, I know there was a question related to the timing of this year's budget process, and you can see that schedule up on the screen. Again, this year, every year is unique. This one's a little bit more as we continue to monitor the impacts of COVID-19 and continually update our budget projections, revenues and expenses based on that. But June 25th is the next time we'll come back, and that's where we'll have the Stantec modeling for you to review. They'll also do the one-on-ones with you in advance, so you can ask any of those questions there as well as at the public meeting. Trim hearing July 22nd. The utility rates public hearing and Stantec's report August 12th. August 26th, fire assessment, stormwater, and then the first public hearing of the budget is September 9th, with the second on September 23rd. And so with that, if there are any other questions, I could answer them at this time. We do have a couple of items to consider related to COVID-19 separate from the workshop.
I got one quick comment.
Yes, sir.
That $105 million that the county got, depending on what our portion is going to be, I'm just curious, what effect is that going to have on our budget? Because I know that there are certain things that this money can be used for and not be used for,
yeah, the guidance that came out from the federal government is that you can't use it to fill a hole in your budget, but I think as maybe what you're alluding to is what costs could be covered out of that would assist. And so we're working with them right now on that. While we don't receive an allocation for them, there has been really good collaboration at this point between the cities and the county as far as distributing that equally across. So.
Oh, yeah.
So there's, a lot of different things that we do for a reason in the economy, talk about housing, so those things are more on the county level, as opposed to getting PPP and things like that, other kinds of
And I know the World Homeless Coalition, they created a task force that they got that covers the whole county. They got individuals from throughout the county that's part of the task force. And I guess it's for expenditures with money that they're going to be receiving throughout the county as well. And there's representation from a lot of different cities.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I think everybody has a concern about raising the rates because of what we want, right? So, have you ever done like a survey with the community? A lot of people are not listening to this. No one cares if they see this. Could we possibly create something online and instead of, understanding how still
Yeah, I mean, trying to ensure accuracy in the reporting may be difficult. I mean, obviously we have. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure about that. When it comes to utility bill, we have to advertise the hearing on the utility bill itself, and that gives the opportunity at that time. So if you have a bunch of constituents that are very vocal about it, and that's your time to decide yes or no.
And you're never going to see them or hear from them until you get that final reading.
Yes. Like I said, to that bill, like even with my own bill, when I got my bill, I didn't usually just, it goes out, come out of my account. I actually didn't look at it at all. So, $7, $8. You don't really realize it until you get the bill. So imagine if I'm a person that doesn't have a job, or may have to do another job that is just what I have.
When you add the back, it's figure something versus all these people hoarding toilet paper, now understand how they're hoarding it. The price is up from $8 to $24. Back at toilet paper, so, yeah.
city manager in the future, when we're having meetings like this time of day, normally you would smell something coming out of that room right there.
I anticipated us being out of here by then. Okay.
We're good, I guess.
With that, we can conclude the budget workshop, and then I know Nancy has a resolution here related to COVID-19 response for our local businesses, sidewalk cafes, based on the governor's phased reopening. This would allow our local restaurants to be competitive in offering space and serving patrons. And
Council, we brought before you a resolution, and it's based on our Economic Development Recovery Task Force. Angela Essing, Charlene Neuterman, Samantha Singer, and of course Matt Farrer was also on the task force. And we were trying to kind of think out of the box as far as how we can help the businesses when they're limited to 25%. So there may be some cases where they could expand their outdoor seating, and it may be where they encroach into another person's property. They may be able to take some parking spaces that are in front of their building. It's going to be unique and creative, and so we wanted to give them that opportunity to have a limited permit where it would allow them to come in with a site plan and the information as far as what type of protective barrier they're going to have. It must be ADA accessible, and just kind of think outside of the box as far as how they can expand their seating. So, of course, with it being in a parking lot, we'd have to look at protecting the clients that are there, and also the cleanliness, making sure that they're out there cleaning. If there is alcohol, that would have to be monitored and kept on site. So we would also limit how many tables they would be able to set up, but it would give us that opportunity to issue these limited permits so that once the executive order becomes 75%, the permits would then go away. So that's basically the summary of the resolution, just trying to give the businesses some opportunities to be a little creative. And it just depends on each one, where they're located, where they have that outdoor space, and how they can expand in order to accommodate more tables.
Do you consider additional signage they're allowed to have? I know it's certain amount of people supposed to be part of the business, like some know that they can't have any signage in the right of way. Could we do something about that part as well to allow them to have that? Whatever sign.
I think we could add that into I'll speak with the city attorney and see if we can add that in as far as additional signage into the resolution.
Do we need to, or can we just tell code enforcement to ignore some of those nice signs that they want?
Do whatever you want.
Yeah, because that's, to me, it's just a simple matter of saying, you know what, we get with the sign signs for these issues all the time. Code enforcement just says, you know what, if they're advertising a business and the business is local or they're putting out from their business, let's have them break for a little while. Because I've seen some local businesses that have put out, hey, we're open, because you can't tell by looking at the business they're open.
You want to do it to 75% like this is?
You're advertising your business down by Palm Beach for one of those signs on that street, and down that, And I have seen a couple of our businesses just put out little signs that said, hey, we're open and here's what we're selling, and we don't want to see them. And I would agree with it.
And so council would support that up to the 75% occupancy? Okay, so it would be a limited time allowing them to have the additional signage.
And then at the 75%, then, there's situations that we've done particularly well. We can always come back
And this is throughout the city, right?
Correct.
I kind of glanced through this, and I don't know if I missed it, but is there, a lot of them are in some of these shopping plazas, whatever. And I hope that they don't think that what we're saying is gospel. They still have to coordinate with their property owners or whoever to make sure that it's okay for them to do that and not think, well, the city said we can do this, so we're doing this, you know.
Right, and we'll do a push of advertisement through social media. There are some requirements. They do have to have the property owner's permission. If they are expanding into another property, they would, of course, have to have that property owner's permission as well. There is also an insurance requirement, and then also the barricades. So we left it vague as to how they would barricade, but it just, each one is kind of different. I mean, some may only need cones, some may actually need the concrete barriers. It just depends on each situation. So, and whether it's on the sidewalk or whether they're actually taking a parking space. So it just kind of gives them that flexibility.
Well, most of the restaurants downtown, they don't have spaces to be outside, especially when they're close to the road. Really updates on that part as
One other area that we're going to try to pilot this weekend is, if you go to a shopping mall, they have like a food court area. Well, not establishing a food court area, but an area where you could be seated. So you could get food to go from a restaurant, and then we offer a public space with seating where you could actually eat. And so while they don't have to have it right on their site, we could offer seating, we're going to try to pilot it in Murtharp Square, utilize those leisure services employees to ensure cleaning of them, extra trash cans, pilot it potentially this weekend, look at how successful that may be, and then we could look at expanding that further to a few other areas to include a street closure of Harrison Street through that portion potentially, or even using the stage at Riverfront Park, even though it's a distance from the restaurants, it provides protection over the top. It's in close proximity to the Civic Center where it could be serviced, but yeah, it would offer a unique experience as well. And so, as we explore these different areas as a pilot, maybe there are some things that we learn that we could incorporate in the future as well. So,
and even though I know you got the barricades up here, and we talked about barricades, it'd be nice if there was something more uniform, so that you don't, because some people's way of barricading things are just totally different. They just totally detract from anything else around it because they just don't see it, And,
well, and that would be the requirement of the permit, and it really would depend on where they were putting the tables with the barricades, what the speed limit is of the street, or how close they are to the street. They could be like, Dixon Diner, they could be in the parking lot and not really have to worry too much about traffic, whereas if you're on Harrison or Delanoy, there'd be more traffic, or on US 1. But I wanted to clarify, as far as the signs, it would only be on that property, not all the way down the streets. Okay. Because I don't want to get in trouble with code enforcement. All the way down 520. Yes.
I don't know, Dennis might not like it.
I don't know. If it's overbuilt, then that might be
Sometimes they go all the way down the street, so that's what I wanted to clarify.
Yeah, I think it's one people.
Okay.
Got a motion from Councilwoman Cost, a second from Councilwoman Warner. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are you still there, Councilman Bover?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
And then I've just got a couple more things to cover. Just to update City Council, the public facilities are currently closed to the public by appointment only at this point in time, and we're looking at potentially a 2-week period for that to remain. But what I'd like to do is get some consensus from council as far as looking at doing that consistent with the governor's phase 2. When he announces the phase 2, we would move towards reopening our facilities to the public at that time. Yeah, they'll be handing these out per our next request, but yeah, he has a phased plan that was developed by the task force. And what we found is that phased plan, while the task force came up with it, what he announced for phase 1 was different than what's in the plan. And you'll see that here coming up. But
What are the phases that he announced and not consistent with the numbers that are being given? That's the issue that I have. I don't want to put out believe that this will the numbers are fine. That's the concern that I have. A lot of people think how
We can do less, you know.
that's my only concern.
Okay.
For our employees at risk, because when you said phase 2, you just jump on it, but yet Clark County and Cocoa talking about.
yeah, the only challenge from our perspective is just, to get in front of the public in a setting like this, when we have to react quickly can be challenging, is why we look for a date like that. But we have a city council meeting on the 13th, next Wednesday. We could come back and talk about it again and see where we're at with the cases and what the talk is coming from the state at that time.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of restaurants who said, well, yeah, we're going to open, but we're not outside people don't know where they're going. So we don't have to do what the government says to get over to what we said. We don't have to come up with these standards that we set our own.
Yeah, because it goes back to, we advocate about reference to home rule year. And the governor says, okay, phase 1, phase 2, and then everybody just goes, damn. And you notice that even down south, they didn't open up, for a lot of reasons, and the number of cases down there. So, like you said, one size don't fit all. And, it might be good for your city to do this, but it might not necessarily be good for us, depending on, it just depends on each individual community.
Okay.
So we have a whole lot more public that access our city hall.
The utilities, yeah.
You don't have anybody going into the office to do all the
Exactly.
So we're unique in that sense, but we need to set our rules already.
Because we'll end up with a lobby full of folks, especially.
Although I don't know, I've heard a lot of folks who say, wow, I can pay my water bill online and they never have to do it. I guess we've had employees that have been talking to people through the process of using their bank to pay their water bill online. Because we had to set it up that way.
We just did a video too, didn't we?
So,
That'll be
I'm
coming
hearing
out.
from people saying, I'm not paying the convenience fee because one of the employees told me not to get it done through the bank. So,
Yes.
whoever's doing that, thank you very much.
They're all doing that, but they did a video too that they're going to release on the different ways to pay a water bill, because the debit card, credit card is the only time you get charged. There's 7 other ways you can pay your bill that's free. So about 20% of our people use the credit card aspect, and they do pay that fee, but that's their choice because they have 7 other ways they could pay, but it's free.
Yeah, well, I'm starting to hear from people that, are giving me
Understanding it, yeah.
All of the people especially.
Yeah, they're walking them through it.
And they're real excited about the fact that they don't have to go to City Hall.
That's great, because it is a lot of people come to City Hall for the social aspect.
Yeah, I have one of those ladies too.
Yeah, and they want a
She
receipt.
will come and pay her water bill till she can't get here anymore.
Yeah, they enjoy coming in.
So you said 20% of our customers do that.
Correct. They pay that fee. That was before the virus. It's only grown since we started charging the fee. Only more and more people use it.
Yeah, they spend that in gas coming up here.
Yeah.
I mean, they come they come in to pay their water bill, they drive here and pay with a credit card. So that's just their choice.
And we still have those working from home.
At this point in time, those that are working remotely either have an underlying health condition or child care issues consistent with that Family First Coronavirus Act. Other than that, we have the employees on site. Yeah, we've installed a number of separation devices between the employees. We still conduct our meetings electronically. So there's a large number of initiatives that we have enacted to further protect those employees, to include temperature checks, as well as the questionnaire prior to. That's right. The only site that currently isn't, because we don't have enough of the infrared thermometers yet, the order hasn't come in, is City Hall. Yeah, we have through Care ETC, our provider at the Employee Health Center. We've got an inquiry into them for the testing as well as the antibody testing. And if there's no more discussion, we'll bring that the closures back at the City Council meeting next Wednesday. And then the final questions related to a letter we'd received from the Historic Cocoa Village Playhouse. They are asking if they can open their facility to a play the very end of May and then proceed with their next scheduled play in June. The reason why they're asking is because City Council took action to cancel all public-private events. Their playhouse is within a city facility, so they fall under that. They also fall under the governor's phased reopening. And the handout that I provided you was what the task force had developed for the phased reopening, and it's interesting because it varies from what the governor actually provided. So he took components of that plan to implement in phase one, and within phase one of the prohibitions was movie theaters. And if you look in this document, it actually identifies movie theaters as well as specifically playhouses. And on the bottom of page 21, I highlighted the section there. It categorizes playhouses with movie theaters within this plan. And in phase one, it actually allows them to open 50% capacity. Of course, he didn't enact that. He said that they're still prohibited from being open. Now, phase two, I would think would likely include them. Now, the timing of that is unknown at this point. You know.
I think it was what, nail shops and beauty salons included in that?
Yep. Yep. So, you know, even those were contemplated being open, of which they're not. Yeah. Yeah, and they have previously mentioned it would be weeks when they rolled out phase one. So, but of course, we're seeing some changes in the cases and in deaths. So yeah, we'll bring that back next Wednesday. Some more information.
There was Stacy had submitted a comment, and I don't know if you want me to read that in as well. So this is from Anastasia Hawkins. She says, hello, I'm Anastasia Hawkins of 2130 Michigan Avenue, Cocoa, Florida 32926. Dear City Council members, I am writing you today to ask for your help in order to keep our historic theater operating. We submitted the document outlining our operational procedures in response to COVID-19 for us to present the remaining shows of our season. We are asking for you to give your approval that we may complete our performances of Into the Woods May 28th through May 31st with all of the mitigation efforts we outlined in our proposed procedures during this phase of reopening business. In order to present on stage, we need at least 2 weeks lead time for the cast, orchestra, crew, and patrons attending the production. If we do not have enough lead time, then we are unable to produce. We currently have patrons who have purchased advance tickets last year, and we desperately need to perform to avoid making any more refunds. All ticket purchases stopped in early March, and we need to complete our season in order to keep our theater open. Furthermore, our children's programming is in jeopardy should we be unable to present Into the Woods the last week of May. Please give us your approval. I am concerned that our historic theater is in jeopardy of being able to survive. Thank you for your consideration and for everything you are doing for Cocoa.
That is correct. And so I know she'd mentioned in that email a 2-week lead time. Depending on what happens, we'll reevaluate it at the next council meeting. And that still provides enough lead time if we have any new information related to the phases of opening. So
we could go ahead and give her permission based on governor's.
if she falls with, under the governor's order.
So she could go ahead and start, when we give her permission to go ahead and start it and propose to the governor change his order by the date of the planning. But right now, with us saying no, through May and June, she can't even start.
That's right, because, she's coming to city council because of the closure of the public-private events, Playhouse being included within that. And so right now, the way I read it based on this plan as well as what the governor has put out, that they still are under restrictions from the governor at this time. Should those be lifted, the restrictions come from the city of Cocoa. And so
So we
that,
could say at our May meeting, okay, Stacy, provided the governor lists his order, move to your level.
yeah.
And she would still have to comply with the governor's. Okay.
What would that mean for all the other? That put us in a situation where we have to follow downtown, allow this to happen. Helping ours, that would.
I think each individual event might have to look and see how they fall under the governor's orders, but some of those events are probably still not going to qualify.
Yeah, some of them.
Yeah.
the concerts.
And then on top of that, it's just the liability if something do happen. You know what I'm saying? It's a city facility, So there's a lot of things to consider. And so even though we might want to do that, we might need to really do some serious thinking about it, just, the liability part.
Every time I get in the news, I feel like, oh, this stuff out there, this stuff that get on the pressure, I go back and read the history of Philadelphia. Do that. All they do is kind of
And we've heard this entire time that there's still a lot of things they don't know about this virus, just a lot out there that they don't know. And if they do know, they're not telling us, but they're saying they don't know. And I'm just going to have to trust and believe that they really, truly don't know.
We worked really hard to build our population back up and I don't know if we would
Are you still with us, Anthony?
Sure am.
Okay, I'm just checking.
I'm here. I agree with the comment that everything's going to be contingent upon the governor's order and whether or not it would be permitted to operate.
No, I was just messing with you, Anthony, see if you're still there.
Okay. Keep that like those.
Okay, is that?
I have nothing further.
Is that it? Okay, Councilman Bovair. Anything?
Yes, sir. Motion to adjourn.
Oh, okay, thank you. We got a motion from Councilman Bovair. Adjourn. Second from Councilwoman Warner. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, sir. And sir?
Okay. Thank you. No. Okay, Anthony.